Senator Mizell has Senate Bill 152. So, Senator Mizell, on your bill, please, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Whoops. I'm hitting the button, but it's...
There we go. There we go.
goes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the patience of the committee. I know there's been some juggling today. I want to, I don't usually have a prepared opening, but I think it's important, just with the conversations that have surrounded this bill, that we look at what the state has done or attempted to do and what the reality is of the state concerning women that are victimized. In Louisiana, the number one cause of death for a pregnant woman is domestic violence. We are fifth in the nation for domestic violence overall. We've acknowledged this, and we all have heard we've got domestic violence shelters around the state. They're hidden, they're protected because we know the woman is in such danger for her life. If she's not in a hidden, protected place, it would not be smart for her to be seen in public. We know that. We've established all sorts of rules on temporary restraining orders. We've heard from local sheriffs saying for a woman to get her concealed carry permit and use it if somebody comes to her house. So, with that in mind, but we've also seen circumstances where when a woman defends her own life or defends her family from assault, she is in prison. She's alive. She's allowed to live, but she's living in prison the rest of her life because she did this crazy thing of saving her own life or protecting her family. So right now, and so that's domestic violence. Trafficking, what we've done with trafficking, right now we've had, in the last count in 2024, 2,328 victims of human trafficking. 90% of that is sex traffic. So in the past 5 years, our response to the fact that we now know we've had over 2,000 women, mostly women, there are men, there are boys, trafficked, is that we've incarcerated 5 traffickers in 5 years. We have over 2,000 victims, but we've incarcerated, based on the Department of Corrections data, 5 traffickers. Over this time, because...
But this is not a trafficking bill, is it?
No, but it
Okay.
addresses
Just
trafficking victims.
Clarify.
No, okay. No, it's trafficking victims, domestic violence, and sexual assault victims. Over the past few years, what we've done in response to victims and their outrage and their calls for acknowledgement, protection, or services, we've passed bills to streamline expungement for trafficking victims. We've passed a rape kit tracking bill because we had not been tracking rape kits using the evidence for prosecution. We posted hotline numbers in public bathrooms. We've improved Title IX because female students were being attacked on campus. We defined DCFS handling children who were trafficked. We've got mandatory training for law enforcement. We've actually passed a law so that sex assault victims could see a copy of their very own assault report. We passed a Sexual Assault Survivors Bill of Rights. In the midst of all that, we are still number 1 in homicides against pregnant women by their domestic partners. We have the 2,000 victims of trafficking. We still have rape victims with untested rape kits, very few prosecutions, and hardly any convictions. So that this leads the question. It's a frustration. I mean, I think we've all shared it with the bills we've passed. If we don't arrest criminals for acts against our citizens, can we at least let our citizens defend themselves in spite of the circumstances they're in, mostly through no fault of their own? This bill doesn't say the person that committed the crime is innocent. It's only that if we want to be fair and just, and that thought should be given to the circumstances that led to the arrest. And we've got victims and advocates here. You know, the bill, I would rather defer the legal questions to this young lady who's going to be able to introduce herself when the chairman's ready. And I think she can handle the statements on the actual legal content of the bill.
Certainly. Yes, ma'am, please state your name and give us your testimony, please.
My name is Alexandra. Thank you, Senator. I clearly still need supervision. I've worked on this bill all across the country, and I've had the privilege to see it signed yesterday in Georgia by Republican Governor Kemp. I had the privilege of watching this bill get signed by Republican Governor Stitt in Oklahoma, the state that's #1 in domestic violence. But if I could ask your indulgence, Chair, I have been asked by the Conservative Political Action Committee to read a message to this committee because it's Police Week in D.C., and they're busy honoring law enforcement. With your permission?
Yes, as long as we don't take up too much time with things not relevant to the bill, because we're supposed to go on the floor in 45 minutes.
This is their endorsement of the bill, and I'm going to read double time.
Okay. No worries. Thank you.
From the American Conservative Union, CPAC, dear members of the Louisiana State Legislature, the Conservative Political Action Coalition, CPAC, is the nation's oldest conservative grassroots organization. With a 60-plus year track record of advancing the conservative movement, we advocate for policies that limit the size and scope of government, protect individual liberty, and reduce the burdens on our families. Through this lens, we are proud to support Louisiana Senate Bill 152, which improves legal protections for survivors of human trafficking and domestic violence, a common-sense update of current law that strikes the appropriate balance between accountability and public safety. We commend the Louisiana State Legislature for taking action on this critical issue and following the example set by fellow conservative states, including Oklahoma and Georgia. We were proud to support similar survivor acts in those Republican majority states, and we welcome the Pelican State's effort to provide justice for survivors. Senate Bill 152 ensures that judges can meaningfully consider the circumstances of survivors of physical, emotional, and human trafficking. Many survivors of domestic abuse and trafficking are coerced, threatened, or otherwise forced into criminal activity by their abusers, including in the act of defending themselves or a loved one. Yet the justice system has often failed to take their victimization into account, leading to excessively harsh sentences that ignore the realities of abuse. This bill recognizes that survivors of domestic violence often face a double injustice, first at the hand of their abuser, and then again by a criminal justice system that may not fully account for the context of their crimes. Senate Bill 152 aligns with key conservative principles, the most important of that being that they do not undermine public safety. Many survivors are serving unduly long sentences in Louisiana despite posing no public safety risk. Louisiana has already led the way in protecting victims by passing legislation to make the criminal justice system work better for victims of human trafficking. Now it can continue that legacy by standing with survivors of domestic violence and passing Senate Bill 152. We urge you to vote yes on this critical legislation. I will send the full record of this endorsement to every member of the committee. But I'm here today as a daughter of Louisiana. My family hails from Tunica, all the way out there, but I'm also a domestic violence survivor. And through God's good grace, I have been able to run this bill all across the country. I have been able to participate in studies that have interviewed every single woman incarcerated in the state, with PhDs who are leaders in the area, to track their entire abuse histories right down to the day that they committed their offense and why they are in prison. We have crafted this bill very carefully because I can tell you the one thing as a domestic violence survivor I'm not interested in is this bill being misused by somebody who is out there to hurt or harm people like me. And I know what it is to fear for your life. And I know what it is. I know what it is to lose your child to an abuser. So when I tell you that I'm not interested in that, I really mean it. In order to qualify for this legislation, you can't just claim that you were abused at some point in your life. That doesn't count here. You have to show by clear and convincing evidence, the highest standard in Louisiana, that your offense was directly tied to your abuse or trafficking. The judge doesn't even have to hear it. He can throw it out if you don't meet the burden of evidence, denied, and it goes in the trash. I've heard all sorts of arguments about this is going to open the floodgates to bad actors. We've actively worked against that, and for states where I have been part of implementation and passage, I can assure you it has not happened. But let me tell you what has happened. Lisa Moss spent 34 years in prison. Why did she spend 34 years in prison? Because her husband was raping her with a hot curling iron and sexually assaulting their 5-year-old daughter. She went and told her brother tearfully. Her brother took his shotgun and went and shot her brother. It shot her husband. She was tried for first-degree felony murder, which, just like in Louisiana, carries a lifetime sentence. She served 34 years of it. That little girl grew up in foster care because of that, because we didn't have a law to correct that. Let me tell you about April Wilkins. 4 restraining orders, 3 rape kits later, she's kidnapped by this guy, dragged to his basement, handcuffed. He was found in his autopsy to have meth and cocaine in his system. She's so tough, she got the gun off him, shot him 8 times, didn't flee the scene, called the cops. She's still in prison. We're fighting her case as we speak. But this law was her first chance to get out. This is only justice. And any argument that you have about the floodgates, I've run this bill. I've been in these states. I've sat in these courtrooms. I've walked out of the room with these survivors. If this bill is running in this country, I am in some way attached to it. Ask me about any state. The pro tem of Oklahoma and the floor leader of Oklahoma, John Echols, who's now running for Attorney General, was endorsed by CPAC and praised for this bill. We are looking forward to its replication at the federal level under President Trump. This is a good bill. It is thoughtful. And all this stuff that you're about to hear about there's no burden of proof, there's a burden of proof. I'm happy to read it out to you. But basically, if you can't confirm your story by hospital records, social services records, or law enforcement, you're not entitled to anything under this bill. Denied, and it goes in the trash. But for the people that we can save, please, as somebody who was this close to relying on this type of legislation herself, just please do the right thing.
The cases you mentioned, were they in Louisiana?
Those are cases that have been passed in Oklahoma, but unfortunately we have similar cases in Louisiana. I got a whole list of cases if you guys actually want to sit here and...
Okay, I'm just curious because I hadn't heard of those cases, but they were in Oklahoma, not here.
Oh, we have cases
You have
here,
others here, okay.
as well, but also those people don't have the protection those survivors do.
Yeah. Why don't we get the gentleman to speak, and just hold on to your seats, and we'll have some questions in a moment.
Certainly.
Thank you, Chairman Morris and members of the committee. My name is Dwight Hudson, Louisiana Director for Right on Crime. Right on Crime is a national campaign of the Texas Public Policy Foundation that supports conservative criminal justice solutions, resulting in less crime, fewer victims, and safer communities. I appreciate the opportunity to speak in strong support of Senate Bill 152. Survivors of trafficking and domestic abuse often live under constant threat, even if that threat isn't a gun to the head at the moment of the offense. Right now, Louisiana law is ill-equipped to address the reality that many of these individuals, especially women, are forced to act under threats, manipulation, and long-term psychological control. Our current duress laws require immediate and direct threats, which simply don't reflect how coercion works in trafficking and abusive relationships. These victims aren't choosing to commit crimes. They're just trying to survive. Senate Bill 152 provides an affirmative defense for survivors who can show by clear and convincing evidence that their offenses were directly connected to the abuse or trafficking they endured. This isn't a loophole. It is a narrowly crafted, evidence-based safeguard that allows the legal system to consider context before casting judgment. It's also in line with what a growing number of states have already recognized, that our laws must reflect the complexity of trauma and survival. I urge you to consider the policy outlined in Senate Bill 152 and how it will improve outcomes for victims of human trafficking and domestic abuse. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Senator Cloud for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You mentioned cases in other states. I would like for you to give us, a brief explanation of 2 or 3 cases that you know of where this issue exists in Louisiana.
Well, I certainly can do that, but also some of them are here, so
Okay.
you can also hear from them directly.
So that have incarcerated females.
Yeah,
that this would
who have been
retroactively.
incarcerated for surviving abuse. But I'll give you a couple of cases I know off the top of my head. For their safety, I'm not going to name names in a public hearing, but if you would like connections offline, I'm also happy to provide those. There's a case that was brought to me 2.5 years ago of a woman who was drugged and forced into a pornographic film with another woman at gunpoint. And that was used by her abuser to coerce her into a whole host of actions. Some of them I would call morally reprehensible, but some of them I would also argue were illegal. It led to her complete and utter mental collapse, and it also ended up leading to her incarceration. He was also arrested and was found to have been distributing this type of pornography very widely, and she was not the only victim, but she also went to prison for being caught in his, what I think we could arguably call perversion.
Okay.
So, are you finished? I'm sorry.
I gotta go vote. I'm coming.
Okay.
No, I'll hold the rest of my questions.
I'm sorry, one more case if you're interested, of a woman who was brought to my attention who was stabbed in her pregnant stomach, got the knife off of him.
What's her name?
I'm not going to name names for their safety because in some of these cases, their perpetrators
in
are still
jail?
active.
They're not in prison yet.
But in some of these cases, the children are under duress. There are other ways that they're being threatened. But I'm happy to share things offline in private with you all if you would like to speak to them and family members.
And these cases that you know of in Louisiana that do have incarcerated individuals, they're primarily or all women?
No, not entirely, but predominantly, yes.
But we do have cases that involve men.
Well, it's worth noting what's very interesting about Louisiana is that in a state like Oklahoma, it's 1 in 2 women, right? So it's 50% of women, but it's only 30-some% of men. In Louisiana, there's only a 1% difference between the experience of domestic violence for men and women. But a lot of that has to do with young men who are subject to watching abuse happen in their households, having to participate in awful things, and also young men are very common victims of human trafficking, particularly sex trafficking in Louisiana.
Okay, I'm going to hold the rest of my questions so we can hear testimony.
You testified about Lisa Moss in Oklahoma.
Yes, sir.
Now, she was convicted of trying to hire a hitman to kill her husband, correct?
That was actually incorrect information. So that's what the DA claimed without evidence.
She's on tape, soliciting the murder for hire with his life insurance proceeds.
So basically what the state claimed was that her brother was hired by her to kill her husband. Her brother, I was in the courtroom during her hearing for this, of which the judge let her walk out of the courtroom, that was just factually untrue, that was a story that was made up by the DA at the time. It was disproven, and the judge in Seminole County let her walk out of the courtroom. It was proven to be so incredibly untrue.
Wasn't it on tape, though?
Yeah.
And they played a tape of her soliciting murder on tape?
If you actually listen to the tape, that's not actually what's happening. That's what was
and the
claimed.
jury heard that, but they believe she was guilty of murder.
The jury actually didn't hear it. The jury heard the claim of the tape. They actually didn't get to listen to the tape.
I see, because somebody objected to its introduction?
Correct.
The defense?
No.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
Again,
Senator Barra for a question.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to congratulate you, Councilman, on your new position. Congratulations. Seems like all this happened yesterday.
I've been here for about a month, actually.
But I guess it's all official now. But congratulations. And certainly, I don't think they could have chosen a better candidate for the job. So I know that you're going to do a great job here. I just wanted I really actually had a question for Senator Mizell because she and I have visited the women's prison and have heard some of these stories. And one that really comes to my mind is the lady who was trying to save her life and actually ended up taking her son's life. And now she's in jail. Yeah. And that is extremely sad. And a lot of that information was not admissible during the court hearing. So for me, I've heard a lot. I have seen a lot. I've experienced a lot. And so I know about these situations. And so I know about the bullying aspect that happens, or the fear aspect that individuals face. And so, Senator Mizell, before you stepped out, I was mentioning some of the cases or some of the situations we've heard.
At LCIW?
Yes, when visiting. And one in particular that sticks with me is a woman who was trying to get away and trying to get away for her own life and ended up shooting a child.
Right.
Who died. And I mean, can anybody just even think about the trauma of that? That alone is more than enough to, I don't even know how she's still sane, and she's still doing a great job there and helping other women. This is very personal for me, and so many of you know that I had this bill a couple of years. You have actually amended it and changed it to actually address some of the concerns that the opponents had. And so I don't know if we have adopted the amendments, Mr. Chair. But
No, there's been no amendment yet.
Oh, the amendment was what I sent. I think that was the, basically
All right,
the whole new bill is the.
1175.
We can take up the amendment in a minute if you're
Because
done questioning.
I think that changes the bill to a great deal.
The big advantage on that, if I could say, Madam Pro Tem, is that the format of that bill and the language of that bill is what's been in place for about 15 months in Oklahoma. So we're able to look back at what took place in Oklahoma, where there was no flood, where there was no unintended consequences, because the burden of proof is so high in order to be reconsidered that it takes the concerns we may have previously had away from it, and we can look at, with historical fact, what's happened in Oklahoma. So I think that it's a benefit we didn't have before, frankly.
And there are other states that have had this in place for 5 to 6 years already, and have had similar laws, not quite as robust, and there has also been no flood. Based on what we know from research of incarcerated survivors in Louisiana, we would probably be looking at a case per parish per year.
Okay. And I know that it's not like my bill with the level of retroactivity, that was retro.
Your bill was your bill was a very, very open one,
Yes.
and I understand that you wanted to cast the widest net.
Yes.
I do think that the language that has been crafted and approved by conservative entities that are pro-ending human trafficking, but also pro-law enforcement, for the reason that we don't want bad actors to claim that once upon a time they were mistreated and therefore use that as an excuse to get out. Because, as we often know, people who are abused sometimes become abusers.
And that's one of the things that was definitely brought to my attention with my bills. And so that's why I wanted to make sure that everyone understood that this certainly is not the bill that I had, that there is an amendment to maybe address some of those concerns. And if we can go ahead and place that bill in the proper posture, I think that would be great.
We're getting close. Senator Abraham.
Are we still on the amendment or still on the bill?
We haven't offered the amendment yet. We're on the bill.
Okay. I'll wait for the amendment.
Okay.
If we could offer the amendment,
Yeah.
because the amendment really is the bill.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Senator Mizell had a set of amendments, 1175 prepared. I'll offer that amendment. Are there any questions on the amendment? On the amendment? Okay. Senator Abraham on the amendment.
So let me try to understand what this amendment does. You mentioned about the court has the ability to throw out the case. In your current bill, that's not the case? In the existing bill, you don't have that in there. Is that, am I reading that right?
You mean the court could throw out the application, the request?
No, I'm looking at, on your amendment, page 2, line.
Hang on a second, Senator Abraham. Have we handed out the amendment?
Yes. Yeah. I have it.
Senator Cloud doesn't see hers. Well, you got it? Okay, we got it. Thank you. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Go ahead, Senator Abraham.
On the amendment, it says on line 9, page 2, upon filing of a motion for resentencing under the article, the clerk of court shall promptly notify the district attorney and provide the district attorney with a copy of the motion. Then line 12, the court finds the defendant's motion fails to comply with this provision of paragraph B of this article, it should deny the motion without prejudice. Then next it says the court finds the defendant motion complies with the sentence, they can conduct a resentencing hearing and that so forth and so on. This is a change to the first bill, right?
Right.
Right.
The court didn't have the ability to throw it out in this first go-round.
That is my understanding.
Okay, I just want to make sure I understand.
There are also a few other key things that were added. You can't just present any evidence. You can't just sort of make a claim. There are specific things that you must present in order for your petition to be considered. I won't read out the list because it is a little bit more exhaustive. But if you were to look on page 3.
Of the amendment.
Yes. On line 35, it says that if you have committed a capital offense, you are not eligible for this bill. If you committed a sex offense, you are not eligible for this bill. In order to be eligible for this bill, the burden of proof, you must provide corroborating evidence in one or more of the following: a court record, a pre-sentence record, a social services record, a medical record, a sworn statement, a law enforcement record, video or audio of the domestic abuse, human trafficking happening, those communications from the abuser or the human trafficker. And, like I said, the list goes on, but it also includes, obviously, doctors being able to do that. So that's the evidence that you would have to provide, or you would end up in the trash.
Just out of curiosity, why wasn't all this put in the bill in the first place, I wonder?
It was a more naively
It was what?
drafted. We were amateurs, kind of, I think, drafting it, not staff amateurs.
It's not her fault. I was busy in Georgia.
Our mindset was that we took a kind of start from zero approach, and I think this is a more seasoned drafting in that it's worked in the other states, and I think it's kind of had a lot more deliberation into where the bad spots were, so it was able to be corrected on that. The first bill kind of was like a patchwork. And, and again, not with staff drafting it, but with the way we were putting the components together.
And I'm assuming that the district attorneys will come up, and I'm sure have they seen this?
Yes.
They've seen it, okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Abraham. Senator Cloud.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That was my question. The district attorneys and those that are in law enforcement, district attorneys, judges, those that have concern with the original version of the bill, when were they? Because this is a big old amendment. I want to read it, and then we have this terrible system here in Louisiana with our legis system that other states don't have. When you get an amendment set, you can't see like a hypothetical or a projected engrossment of how it would apply, what it would remove and add in an original bill. And so usually I have to go through and piecemeal it back together with a red pen and try to put it in to understand the application of it, what was removed and what was added.
But this is pretty much almost where you're not having, at the very beginning, you're removing some stuff, but then you have the substance. It's really a solid body of the bill.
So it kind of
at the
rewrote
center. Right.
the bill?
So you're not having to take it in and out. I mean, when
Okay.
you look at from the bottom of page 1 all the way through, it's really the bill.
Okay. Yeah, I had actually had this happen to me last week. I had a bill like this with a huge, I pretty much rewrote the substance of the bill. And so I sent it to members the day before, but they still wanted time to read it. And so I had to wait a week.
Yeah, and actually, I think staff sent this to every committee member over the weekend.
Okay.
So
Okay.
we did attempt to head off.
And then the opponent, those that are opposed,
Had it since April 15th.
they've had the amendment
I'm
since.
just looking at it.
16th, I can send you the email between me, CPAC, and LDAA, laying out all of the amendments that we're asking for, also providing them with all of the evidentiary standards from all of the other states as to how this conclusion was come to.
But the drafted amendment said, like this,
that-
how long
that.
have they had this drafted amendment
April
set?
16th.
April 16th.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, we've had that in-house working on it and getting support on that.
Okay. Okay. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a lot. I wish I would have read it over the weekend. Thank you.
Well, it was sent to, Senator Mizell had it sent to all of us late last week or over the weekend.
Yeah, it was at the end of the week, I think.
Is there any objection to the adoption of the amendment? There being none, the amendment will be adopted. Back on the bill. Any other questions? Okay. We have some more people to testify in support of the bill. So why don't we bring them up one by three at a time, I guess. Tommy Clark, Jr., Richard Ducote, and Sean Cassidy. Yes, sir, why don't we start with you, and we'll work our way this way.
Good afternoon. My name is Richard Ducote. I'm an attorney in Covington. I've been practicing law for 47 years, devoted almost exclusively to advocating for abused women and children. During law school, I was a juvenile probation officer, and I was involved in reforming the foster care system back in the 1980s. I'm very familiar with the population that this bill is addressed to. And primarily, these are the throwaway kids who end up on the street because they're abused by their parents. They run away. They are befriended by somebody who promises to look after them, to care for them. They have no way out. They fall for the deception, and they're trafficked, they're abused, they're threatened, they're coerced. They were abandoned by the people that God entrusted them to when they were born, and they have no way out. And they don't see when they are forced into a situation where they have to either commit a crime to avoid being killed themselves, or to otherwise defend themselves, than to take the action that they're taking. This is not in any way a get-out-of-jail-free card. This is simply a window to go back and to apply an enlightened look at two of our oldest criminal defenses. That is self-defense and duress. And what this does is give judges a chance to go back and look at situations and make an evidence-based, rational look consistent with due process to determine whether or not this particular person who is incarcerated for a crime was in a situation that you really have to have worked with people in the situation to understand how compelling the force is to survive under these circumstances. And you have to prove what happened to you. It's not an exoneration by any means. It's simply a let's look and see if maybe the sentence that was imposed on you did not take into account the horrendous life conditions that you were faced with no window, no door to escape. And that's all this does. And, you know, it's ironic that in many situations, if somebody kills their trafficker or kills somebody who is abusing them in a domestic violence situation, they have a better chance of acquittal in self-defense than if they commit some of these other crimes that they're coerced into by their traffickers or their abusers. The notion that this is going to simply give people the opportunity to come and say, "Oh, I was abused," give me a break. That's not it at all. I have lost clients to murder, to suicide, to drug addiction. I've lived this and have studied and have trained judges and psychologists and physicians for 50 years now. And this is a good bill. It's an important bill. It's a just bill, and I hope that it's approved.
Thank you for your testimony. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
You're next.
Chief Tommy Clark from the city of Graham. I serve as Chief of Police and Superintendent of Safety Services there. 22 years in office, 32 years in law enforcement. But I'm here because of the Louisiana Chiefs. I'm assigned to the human trafficking and domestic violence on both of those boards. And I have to say, one thing I like to remind everyone in the room when I'm doing a briefing like this would be that a kid has only one chance at being a kid. They only get one shot at it. And I think it's up to us to allow them to have that opportunity. And we know when we look at domestic violence, human trafficking, and sexual assault involving kids, that's taken from them with no choice of their own, and it sends them down a different path of life, probably for their entire life. But when we look at this, the reason why I know we have to support this, because this is just another avenue to allow for someone to present evidence that it must be proven, and they have to present evidence that connect them to that crime. Not saying that it happened and this is just a reaction. It had to be proven evidence that connected to the crime, and I think we owe them that, at least an opportunity to bring it forward. It don't say we open the door and give a turnkey effect to anyone who's been in a domestic violence or a human trafficking situation. It say we look at each case individually, and we heard the testimony. We're looking at maybe one per parish per year, and I don't think it's gonna climb that high that quick, because we're gonna have evidence and proven evidence, and if the evidence is not there, then the DA and the judge can send it back and let go of it. And that's all is on the law enforcement side of it. We just feel like that opportunity should be allowed and presented to them. They have no other way to present it. And I want to say this. When you look at DNA, from fingerprints, from latent prints to DNA, technology is constantly changing. It's constantly changing. And we know if evidence is out there, it's going to be something now to connect that evidence.
Well, this has nothing to do with finding new evidence. Right now, if there's new evidence, it can be brought forward and somebody can be let out of prison.
Right. But what we want to do is...
that's already the law.
Right.
This isn't opening that door.
No, so it's opening. What I want to make sure we hone in on...
That door's already open, is my point.
Yeah, it's not closed, but we want to say when they have been a victim involved in one of these heinous crimes or being a victim of that crime, we want people to know that can also cause them to react to something that may have occurred. And if that evidence can prove that that's connected to the reason why they committed that crime upon their abuser or someone who allowed that, then that will open that door for them to maybe look at the sentencing or the evidence that they had proved connected to that crime.
Okay. Are you done?
I'm clear there.
Okay, thank you. Senator Hodges has a question.
Thank you. I just had a question, if you could clear it for me, because you talked about if they qualify. This is not a blanket statement, a get out of jail free.
Yes,
but
ma'am.
if they qualify to apply for this, what evidence could they possibly present now that they didn't present prior to that? I'm just trying to understand.
A lot of times when
If the bill passes, what will it allow them to do?
I think it will allow them opportunity to pull all their medical records, their previous police reports, and anything showing that they was abused or they've been in these situations. A lot of times that may not be brought forth in the first trial. being that they are arrested and brought forth and then charged. But I think this would allow them to, if they had it on file, then I feel like they can bring that proven evidence that's connected to that particular case to show that that's the reason they may be a victim of that, and they got proof that they was a victim of that. Not just bringing evidence to say, oh, well, I was over here and it happened. But I think that will give them that opportunity.
There's cases that probably, maybe, the evidence was not presented, that they're not aware of, that they would bring forth.
Yes, ma'am. I do.
They can do that now.
Well,
If there's new evidence, it can be brought forward of someone's innocent.
Saying evidence maybe that was not used before.
This bill, as it now stands, with the amendment, simply allows anybody that was convicted of a crime, a violent crime, with exceptions, can ask to have their sentence reduced by saying they were a victim of crime, and it has a whole list in the amendment of how they can have their sentences reduced, even though they were convicted by a jury or a judge if they waived the jury.
could I address your question briefly? So there were two defenses that were available in the justification defense in criminal law. One was duress, the other was self-defense. And as I stated in my testimony, this opens up sort of a merger, an enlightened merger of those two concepts for the purposes of sentencing. So when people are tried on the guilt or innocence phase, if they don't meet the strict test of duress as it's defined in the criminal code or the strict definition of self-defense, then a lot of that evidence is inadmissible. So either there is a problem with people being poorly defended in court, and we see that in a lot of the battered
But
women.
if that happens, they have the right.
That's correct.
They have the right to attack it for ineffective assistance of counsel. So that's already the law.
Sure, I was just trying to explain
I
why it
understand.
is
I'm
that
just
this
trying to make sure
evidence for
we're clear on
sentencing
this.
is I think more relevant at this point.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Senator Barrow for a question. We'll get to you.
So initially, I was just wondering if I should say anything, because I know that these things are part of the law. But what I do also know is it's the cases that we have seen at the women's prison here in Louisiana where they were not properly represented, and because they don't have money, they don't have the resources, they can't afford to pay for the evidence to be able to prove that information when it was not. And I'm assuming it was shared at the time with those maybe public defenders, PDs, or whomever they had in terms of their attorneys. It was still not used as a part of their case.
Sure.
This is just an opportunity to ensure, and this has been very tightly written. As I look at it, definitely compared to the bill I had, there's a lot that an individual will have to go through to be able to prove that this happened. You have to have records. And one thing I also know about individuals who have been, especially in domestic violence situations, what we heard recently at our Women Caucus retreat, about those who are part of the human trafficking world, because that's a whole different animal by itself. People don't even realize that they're being human trafficked, right? Because they think this is a part of life. You talk about a child, they only have one life, and they are being born, these kids, you call the throwaway kids, that broke my heart when you said that, but that's how some people treat them, and they come into this world, no fault of their own, can't pick their families, and they get put into these situations. And then for some of them, there's never any recourse. They go down this path that they can never get off. It's a merry-go-round, and it's not their fault. But going back to what I was saying, that whole arena, they don't even know. They don't even know that it's even wrong, because they haven't learned anything different. What they have seen, what they have experienced has been this whole cycle that does not give them the opportunity. So this only allows if they share this information, because some folks are so ashamed, that's the other part, that they never would do a report. So guess what? Some of them will never be able to participate because there will never be a police record, because they will never report it. So this is very tightly written. It's going to be hard for individuals. It's going to be hard, but it's going to be a door opening for those individuals who have had the courage to step through the door. So I just wanted to kind of speak to that.
Thanks, Senator Banner. To be clear, right now, somebody already has the right to put on any defense they may have, whether it's self-defense or they were under duress. In addition, if they're convicted, there's a pre-sentencing report where the judge can take into account everything that happened to the accused or the defendant who was convicted, whether they're a man or a woman, and they can take that in consideration in the sentencing, correct?
Ideally.
There's always a pre-sentencing report in a felony.
But this would
next.
mandate that the judges would have to have a hearing to consider this information for purposes of sentencing. Without introducing myself, my name is Sean. Hi, I'm Sean Cassidy, an attorney and legal advocate at LaFasa, the Louisiana Foundation Against Sexual Assault. I've consulted with and provided direct representation to hundreds of sexual assault survivors throughout Louisiana since 2016. Through my firsthand experience with survivors, I can personally attest that their plight is overflowing with a series of obstacles that appear at every turn, often not believed, even by family members and loved ones, blamed for somehow inviting sexual violence, derided by the public at large for having ulterior motives, and failed repeatedly by systems purportedly designed to protect them. I can tell you from experience, sexual assault survivors feel unheard and unseen. This bill provides consideration for sexual assault survivors that has been lacking. It would provide a common sense measure to recognize the very real impacts of sexual violence by telling judges that under a specific set of circumstances, which includes documentation of abuse, they must consider the survivor's recent abuse when determining the severity of sentence. This bill does not give anyone license to break the law without consequence. Rather, it simply shines a much-needed light on the hellscape many survivors must wade through. It tells survivors, in the context of sentencing, that we, as a state and as a community, hear you and see you, and offer at least some measure of understanding and consideration for what you've been through. Thank you.
Thank you. The board is clear. You may return to your seats. We have a couple of more witnesses to come up to testify. Jennifer Best and Michelle Johnson. Jennifer is with the Something Centers for Hope and Healing.
Eden Centers.
Okay. Ms. Best, you can go ahead and give your testimony, please, ma'am. Thank you.
My name is Jennifer Best. Thank you for letting me be here today. I serve as CEO of Eden Centers for Hope and Healing. We are an anti-trafficking organization in Louisiana that specializes in the trauma recovery of human trafficking survivors. It is an honor to be here today in a room of movers and shakers. I am here to voice my support for this bill as someone that has spent the last decade specializing in trafficking recovery. This bill matters because they are human beings, and it is their lives at stake. Can we carefully look at the context of their stories? I've seen firsthand the impact of being a victim of domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking. It has wreaked havoc on the lives of victims that takes a lifetime to recover. It affects every area of the survivor's life: financial instability, mental health concerns, physical health, and extensive legal issues. Many of our trafficking victims that enter our care have committed forced crimes under their trafficker. Survivors have already overcome so much, and the task given in order to recover is lengthy. There's trauma therapy, there's addiction therapy, there's family reunification, there's going back to school to try to gain employment, sustainable jobs. Then to have to be sentenced to a crime that they were forced to commit provides a huge barrier to a survivor's recovery. Can we just take time to ask the question, what is the context of the situation? Human trafficking is complex and often misunderstood. I want to be very clear that the crime of human trafficking is a violent theft of agency, identity, and survival. Trafficking survivors are not free agents. They do not make decisions on their own. They are manipulated, threatened, isolated, and often brutalized into committing acts that they would never choose to do so on their own. They are in survival mode. My hope is that we can look at victims as survivors of a crime first and not as criminals. When you get a glimpse to the context, you will see victims fighting for their lives just to make it another day. We have heard many stories of our survivors that were required to meet a quota each night. There's a quota. That quota does not change if the demand is low. If you fail to meet a quota, there's more abuse, there's more isolation, and threats of even death. Using the victims to commit their crimes is just another way for the abuser or trafficker to confuse the system and escape accountability. If I had more time, I would tell you about my friends Maya, Dominique, Chris, and Lori, all who did what they needed to do to survive. But when given the opportunity, when given resources to make decisions on their own, they chose to do good. They're not only changing their own lives and their own trajectory, they're helping to change others as well. I would tell you that they went back to school, that they're seeking degrees in business and social work. They're earning certifications that land them sustainable jobs. I would tell you that when given the opportunity, they took advantage and they made a good choice. Victims who commit crimes are still victims, and I urge you to create space to allow true healing and to give hope. They deserve a chance. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Yes, ma'am. You're Ms. Johnson.
Yes, Michelle Johnson, Michelle Johnson Consulting. I serve as a state expert regarding human trafficking. I'm also a survivor myself, and I see a lot of familiar faces from probably 2022 when we passed the Michelle Johnson Act, which provides post-conviction relief for nonviolent offenses if you were trafficked. And so I want to first thank you all for who were a part of passing that legislation. Since then, I have actually filed all of my post-conviction relief all throughout Southeast Louisiana. And a part of that is because of the crimes that I was forced to commit. The gentleman earlier who talked about throwaway kids, my trafficker, he used to go out on Government Street and recruit the throwaway kids. He used to say nobody would look for them because nobody cares about them. And so that's where our traffickers go. Usually perpetrators, they don't look for people who have self-esteem and that they have family, social organizations or anything like that. They look for the vulnerable people. With me, I was vulnerable. Yes, I had a childhood of exploitation, trafficking, sexual abuse, physical abuse, all of that. And that kind of set me up for the platform of what we heard earlier. You either become a victim or an abuser. And so in my case, I continued to be a victim. And by the time I was an adult, I landed in domestic violence situations. I was beat to where I was unrecognizable, and I remember sitting in it was almost like I was in an ENT chair at the emergency room, and the doctors calling law enforcement and all these things, and I just looked. Even my mom said, if you don't tell, I will disown you. And in that moment, I was more afraid of my boyfriend, who almost killed me in this instant, that he would kill me if the court did not handle the case properly. And so in that case, I refused to tell. And so by the time I met a trafficker, I was already abused, sexually assaulted, and trafficked as a minor. So it looked very familiar to what I was used to because DCFS never got involved. I was in foster care as an infant, and then that was it. And so for me, when I met my trafficker, he said he was a pimp. I said there was no such thing. That's only on TV. And he laughed. And so from that moment on, he decided to start grooming me, became my boyfriend, and then he sold me to a gorilla pimp when I refused to sell myself pretty much. And from there, I was locked into a total institution in trafficking. There is no way out unless you encounter the people who know what trafficking is. And so I was in that from 2008 to 2011 until FBI recovered me. And from there, I had charges all throughout Southeast Louisiana. My quota was $10,000 a night, and the most I made in one night was $90,000. I never saw any of it. All the money was turned over to him. And through that, again, I had charges for access device fraud, theft. I would show up to court, I would cry. And then at one point, when FBI recovered me and I was sitting in jail, I know there was a mention of there's relief. Well, I told my public defender that I was a victim of trafficking. He told me, he talked to the DA's office. Nobody cared. That was not considered. I was cooperating with FBI at the time. And what happened to me was I was sentenced to 3 hard labor sentences for access device fraud for money that I did not have, that everyone knew that my trafficker had. And so I ended up doing 3 years hard labor, 3 years hard labor, 4 years hard labor for money that everyone knew I did not have. When I came out of the life and I'm doing the work that I do now, one of those DAs told me, I wish I would have known because maybe I could have done something. But that's when we get out and we go back in to help others. And so in my situation, I'm charged. I'm a convicted felon. I mean, my attorney is here today who, we just filed everything. There's charges that I don't even know about where I was charged. I was literally a robot walking through the court system, doing whatever my trafficker told me. And so whenever I was identified, yes, I told on him. Like FBI made sure I felt safe enough. And then, while I was in jail, all of that, they waited till I was out. But then we're waiting on a victim to be released from prison so we could go after the trafficker because I was not safe there and I was the main witness. And so now he's locked up doing 45 years so he can't harm another person. But what about the others? Down in the French Quarter. So for example, I was forced to go out into the French Quarter and I had to use prostitution to solicit people, get them to go to the ATM, get their debit card, and withdraw all the money off of it. That is financial crimes that victims, if you're looking at a prostitute, you will not see that. And we are known to say, oh, I do this for myself. Oh, I work. When I train law enforcement, I show my police report of where I was encountered and what they did when I refused to identify. I just bawled my eyes out. And then they say I knowingly, willingly, and all these things did this crime. But those people never asked me where the money was or what is happening. And we have a federal defense law for trafficking victims if they commit a crime, but we have nothing on the state level, which is why I'm in support of this bill, because if this bill would have been a law when I was being incarcerated, I would have been able to use this as a defense for my nonviolent crimes.
You can't use it. That's been stripped out of the bill. It doesn't provide for a defense at trial. It only provides for a reduction in sentence.
So we took out the part for the...
It's not correct.
Well, that was the main part. Well, can we amend it back in?
That's up to the author to try to do that. But this amendment was sent to us over the weekend. But be that as it may, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just wanted to make sure you understood what the bill did and did not do at this point. But feel free to finish.
Yeah, so it's like we now have the post-conviction of it, but now we're not recognizing the pre-conviction. That's the whole point. Because we have victims who, there are some ADAs that work with us if we're already advocating for a victim. But in my case, whenever I was arrested, nobody was advocating for me because nobody knew about me. And so currently, if we
Your attorney didn't advocate for you? I'm just curious.
My attorney didn't have a clue as to what human trafficking was.
So you never told him, or he didn't understand?
I told him.
He didn't understand what that meant?
He did not know what it was. And the ADAs did not know what it was.
Anyway, I'm sorry, are you finished?
I just realized that it was amended out. That was the whole part
Okay.
of my testimony.
The only reason I asked, because people have questions, and I didn't want to recognize anybody for a question until you were concluded.
No, I think I'm done.
Okay,
Yeah.
the questions will probably be for you, so you'll get to speak some more. But, okay, well, you're first up. Senator Cloud.
Okay, I think mine, I don't want to, Senator Mizell's walking out. You have to go vote. Okay, I'm going to hold my questions because they're more mechanical.
Okay. Thank you, Senator Cloud. Senator Barrow.
So, oftentimes, and I don't know why, this bill is very tightly written. And I get it in terms of probably trying to get it through the process. And at least it does provide some opportunity for those individuals who find themselves in these situations to have an opportunity to present that information. But I wanted to say that, you talked about your attorney, because I want to go back to that, because I want to make sure that that is not lost in this. And then the perception, so there are a lot of different factors. The perception of what happens versus what should happen when individuals are given an attorney if they can't afford to actually hire an attorney. And so I heard in our retreat that sometimes they refer to individuals, certain young ladies, even some young men, as being hot, fast, or they're just trouble kids, or they ask for it, or this is what they want to do, or something to that effect. And so because they kind of deem them that way, they don't even really ask them what happened, and oftentimes that information is never really shared. Can you speak to that? Am I accurate in that?
No, yeah, a lot of times kids are, especially within DCFS, you're already coming out of an atrocity. You're coming out of either sexual abuse, physical abuse, or neglect. And so and also our, entertainment industry, we push that. And so our kids are listening to the music. They're watching, what is it, like the reality TV shows. Everybody on TV is half naked. And they're listening to music about making money off of your body. And so our kids are being indoctrinated through that to where they are now acting out what their environment is. And so they get wrote off as fast, hot. Oh, they're not a victim because they asked for it, when really and truly they're just being passed around. And then with my attorney, I was looked at as a prostitute, not a victim. Mm-hmm. I never woke up and said, I'm going to go sell my body. I was beat and sold into it, and then mentally coerced through either force, fraud, or coercion. And so if I didn't want to be there, if I went home to my mom, he would go and pick me up and tell me, you don't want me coming in there, you better come out now. And so for everyone's view of me, that's what I was. And that's all that I was worth to them, to myself, everyone, until FBI told me, no, this is human trafficking. Because I walked amongst everybody. At lunchtime, when everybody goes to lunch, I was being sold. People were coming to the hotel to buy me. And so it's like, we can't just look at people like, oh, they chose that life, or oh, they choose this or that. When I drive down the road and I see someone walking on the side of the road, I question, what is their story?
Yeah.
And then I question, who's going to drive by and stop and talk to them?
Mm-hmm. So I just thank you, and I'm glad that you are re-emphasizing that, because I do not want that to be lost in terms of the process. We know how it's supposed to work, but that's not how it always works, and oftentimes that's not how it works.
Oh.
Especially for, and I hate to keep saying this, but I do say it because this is what I have seen and this is what I know, especially for women, especially when you don't have the money.
Yes.
When you don't have the money and you don't have the means and you can't afford an attorney, then what you get is what you get.
And then another thing about my attorney was I never saw my attorney except for on my court dates. And so there was no pre-trial or whatever. It was like, okay, this is what they're saying. This is what I advise you to do. And then also at one courthouse, I was told on my second court date that if I didn't take the plea deal, they had a trial, jury trial deal picked out downstairs. And then I was looking at 99 years in prison if I did not take the plea deal.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Thank you also.
Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Barrow. Senator Hodges.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a couple of things. When was your sentencing? When did you serve?
I was sentenced to 3 different sentences. They were ran concurrent, so 3 years, 4 years,
in what
all
year?
hard labor.
In what year? Can you turn me on, please?
2011.
You are on.
Oh, okay. Well, we started the Human Trafficking Task Force. I believe it was Senator Long started that in 2012, and we got it up and running in 2013. And hardly anyone knew anything about human trafficking. You in the room who were a part of that knows that. Even law enforcement was very unfamiliar because it was all prostitution, and the mindset was they're willingly doing this. But we've since learned human trafficking is a billion-dollar industry, bigger than drugs. Mm-hmm. And that's what you're talking about. The industry that it profits off of young women and children, the abuse that they go through, the terror that they live in is for billions of dollars. And so when you're terrified, you're told you'll be killed. Some are killed and murdered. And so that's what I believe Senator Mizell is seeking to help those victims who possibly before we were aware of this. And I was looking, and Senator Morris knows I'm not an attorney, and I appreciate his explanation, but on page 3, from my understanding, and I could be wrong on this, but it says the defendant shall be required to prove by clear, convincing evidence that the victim of the instant offense was a perpetrator of domestic abuse, sexual assault, human trafficking, or psychological abuse. And so it's dealing with those 4 things, and I think we have to. And she said there was 2,000 cases of human trafficking and 5 arrests. In 5, that's something wrong with this picture. And so that's a huge concern, and I applaud your courage because you can sit there without breaking down, but I know how tough it must be for you and everyone that can come to this table and share your story to help protect other victims who have gone through this, who are still incarcerated because they were trying to survive. I just applaud your courage and your work towards helping victims, and I just hope we can have an open mind on this. This is not to let people get out of jail, but the fact is that even law enforcement was not aware of how prevalent human trafficking was, and that you truly are a victim of this. And so I just want to say thank you for your testimony, and I want to thank Senator Mizell for bringing the bill to help protect women and young men. I know that there have been victims that were male as well. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Hodges. Senator Cloud.
Thank you. I know Senator Mizell's back in, so I have I guess in application, I'm reading through it, and it's mentioned throughout the bill that this would reference the court shall consider the mitigating role of domestic abuse, sexual assault, human trafficking, or psychological abuse in the defendant's commission of the offense. Right. I mean no disrespect at all to victims, none, so please don't take it that way. My human trafficking, often there's corroborating evidence of human trafficking, sexual assault, or hopefully there is, domestic abuse, the psychological abuse, though it is serious. If that is alone an assertion that they're able to use as a mitigating role, psychological abuse on their own, what's to stop people that are incarcerated for very serious crimes of not claiming psychological abuse, because I would think that even many of us in the legislature at some point or another can say that we experienced that.
That's a very loose translation. That's like saying a thunderstorm's going to give me PTSD. It does not equate. And I think it's there was conversation, frankly, on taking this out.
Okay.
Without acknowledging psychological abuse, you basically have to, if somebody punches the wall out right next to my head, they haven't touched my head.
Mm-hmm.
I have no injuries to show you, but I'm scarred by that.
I agree completely. But
right.
Do you?
So how do we ignore it then?
I agree, but if it stands alone as in the mitigating role in a consideration for reduction of sentence, if it stands alone, my concern is that it could be used for the abuse of what you're trying to do. And I don't know how to fix it, Senator Mizell. Mm-hmm. And I mean no disrespect. You know that.
Right.
I just, at the same time that we're trying to fix a problem, we don't want to create a larger problem.
No, and if it's okay, Michelle wants to add to the response. But I think it's really important what you just said. If you don't like this bill, if we don't like trafficking, if we don't like domestic violence, if we don't like sexual assault and women not being able to defend themselves without going to prison, then find what we do like.
Mm-hmm.
Because what we've got, frankly, has not worked.
I hear you.
Senator Mizell, we still have the right of self-defense, and people do get charged with crimes and use that self-defense, or they're not charged because they were defending themselves. So I don't think you're implying that we don't have the right of self-defense in this state, are you?
No, I'm implying that trafficking victims and domestic violence victims don't always have the same level of justice that other people do.
But in the sense that they have the right to assert the same defenses that anybody else does. I mean, I've represented somebody who murdered their boyfriend, and I got him off, no time served, because it was self-defense, and I was able to show that to the prosecutor. I mean, no one on this committee, whether we're for this bill or against this bill, are for human trafficking. Michelle's story is moving and tragic, and I do blame the system in part for not prosecuting those who engage in this behavior. And it is difficult to prove, and I'm sure the DAs will say that, and hopefully they're getting better. But the last thing I want is someone to not be able to assert their right of self-defense. But my concern is opening the door to everyone to be able to assert that they were a victim in order to get their sentence minimized or as a defense, because it will be used by everybody that's in prison.
It's a very narrow guardrail on who can even ask for reconsideration.
Anybody can ask. Anybody
they can ask,
anybody
but they can
file a motion.
Denied at the first
anybody
point
can file a motion and assert that they were psychologically abused or whatever. And some may be able to prove it, some may not. But I just don't want it to be implied or asserted that we don't, in Louisiana, provide the right of self-defense and duress as a defense to crime, which we do. But I digress. Senator Hodges, I'm going to recognize her for a question.
Oh, she had a
Well, just, Senator Mizell, just a question, because I think it could possibly muddy the water with the psychological issues. Anybody can claim they were psychologically, that could be a claim that you have. Would you be willing to let us take the psychological abuse out, amend that out, and then we could work on it, maybe a tighter definition between here and the floor? Are you opposed to that?
There is a legal definition of psychological abuse, which is what I'm saying. It's not a broad, when you go, and I know Senator Kleinpeter knows this, I can't assert as a veteran, I cannot assert I have PTSD without having verifiable actions that I was involved in or exposed to that caused the PTSD.
So there would be
That's the
proof
only
of
example.
psychological abuse, is what you're saying?
There would have to be evidence of situations that were, and they have to be diagnosed. They had to have historically been in situations that would have been, where they would have been exposed to psychological abuse, sort of how PTSD would be, where you have to show what triggered that PTSD or what triggered that psychological abuse. And it can't just be a random thing. There has to be some connection to the person that caused it. Otherwise, and this is my concern, and since we're all showing due respect today, I think with all due respect, without it, you have to have wounds and physical evidence to show that you were threatened.
But psychological abuse is not physical abuse.
Huh?
Psychological abuse is not physical abuse.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. So we have to wait till somebody has physical abuse if we can't say they're going through psychological abuse?
Okay. Then I won't make that motion.
Could Michelle make her comment? She
Yeah,
had that.
sure.
Yeah, for Senator Cloud. So I've never heard of psychological abuse, so I'm so sorry. But psychological coercion, that's needed to prove trafficking. And so how I gave the example of when I would run and go home to my mom, he would come to the house and say, if you don't come out, I'm coming in. And that's not a threat, that's a promise. And so it's how you perceive that threat. And so, for example, to prove human trafficking, you have to prove it through force, fraud, and coercion, which is the psychological coercion side. With my trafficker, we went to trial and all elements were proven, and we didn't even have to prove force, fraud, and coercion because all the victims were under the age of 21. And so that is in the law for trafficking, where you don't even have to make the actual physical threat. It is just, you perceive that threat as it's going to happen. And usually whether it's them beating another person or killing another person, to show you that they're going to do it if you don't do what they say. So that's one thing that I wanted to add as to, the psychological aspect. It gets real confusing because it's like, okay, you have the physical threat where they're holding the gun to your head. And so it's like, that's a physical threat. And then the psychological is saying, I will do this if you don't do X, Y, and Z. And so that's where that component comes in. It gets really confusing. For a person who's been abused, if I feel like y'all are all, established, and so if somebody comes up to you and says, holds you at gunpoint and says, give me your wallet, give me your keys, give me everything, what would your response be? You don't know if you're going to live or die in that moment. So would you hand it over, or would you look at them like, you're crazy, I don't know what you're talking about? You don't know what that threat would be.
I just have one thing to say and to add into this is I don't know one victim that just suffered psychological abuse. If you were to back up and look at the context, there would be physical proof from a hospital at some point along their trajectory. There will be their ACE scores as child. So I just wanted to kind of broaden that view a little bit. I don't know one survivor that you can just pinpoint that one thing.
And you can see on the amendment, there is an explanation of what psychological abuse would be. But if it's okay, I believe if Alexander could elaborate on.
Sure. I mean, the bill in the amendment at the bottom of page 2 defines psychological abuse, and it's. And this is so any of these things can constitute psychological abuse. It's real or threatened mental threats, real or threatened mental intimidation, threats, and this is coercive control, or economic or financial control, or humiliation. So theoretically, under this bill, somebody that uses humiliation in and of itself and then proves it under the other section, then they're entitled to the relief.
Well, they would have to, there's a way that they would have to prove it. So if you go under the section, what you must prove, what you must provide in order to prove your case, you will see that the verification of consultation with a licensed mental health provider, an employee of the court acting within the scope of his employment, attorneys, social workers, obviously rape crisis counselors, or, and as we see here, people who specialize in human trafficking, you would have to provide, as it was a great example, if a veteran wants disability status for PTSD, they have to prove that they have PTSD. And the vet has, and they have to buy that. That has to be verified in order for you to claim. And can I also say, I've never seen a case come forward in all of these laws that was based solely on mental duress. It was always part of it. I've never seen it solely be there. But there are cases where we've had women whose children are being held as collateral in order for the person to do what they want. I can't think of anything more psychologically torturous. You could never put your hands on me a day in my life. But if you have my children under a gun, I can't think of anything more torturous. And we've seen cases like that. And as a matter of fact, in domestic violence and human trafficking, it is so very frequent that they will, and this is a gross term, breed their victims and use those children as their next crop, but also use them as leverage. You can see them if you do this.
And there's a special place in hell for those people that do that.
Couldn't agree.
Nobody on this committee, I think, would dispute that. But I do have other questions from the committee. Senator Cloud is next in the queue.
Yeah, and Senator Cloud remains confused and concerned because what you said, ma'am, you did mention that in these cases it's usually never a standalone psychological abuse, that there's other issues along with going on with the psychological abuse. But under this bill, it allows for the motion for resentencing, as the chair expressed, to be filed solely on the basis of psychological abuse, which could be humiliation. And so it is loose and it is concerning because that is a loophole and a point of potential abuse of this legislation if it becomes law, because it is a standalone. And I think you verified that. Yeah, and I know you didn't mean to. I mean, you're trying to do good. I know that, but I am concerned as a standalone. And when he read the definition of, including humiliation as a standalone factor in psychological abuse, that is concerning, and it has to get tightened up. This is going to
So I think the comments that were made on the levels of validation of the psychological abuse would fall into that. It's not just going to be somebody coming up with, oh, I went through that. You have to have all that support documentation, licensed medical professionals to support what you're saying. And I go back to my previous comment. I know nobody here is for trafficking or domestic violence or any of that. But my question, and I know I'm not supposed to ask a question, but my thought to myself is if you don't like this bill and you still don't like trafficking victims being incarcerated or domestic violence for longer periods of time than they deserve, then can we come up with something that would be
Right.
suitable to your liking.
Right, and it's not, I agree with the intent of the bill. And the last thing I would want to see is someone incarcerated when they were just defending or protecting. And I think everybody on this committee wants to, with the same. But at the same time, I do spend time in the prisons, and it's mostly male prisons. I haven't, well, I'm just saying, and they do spend a lot of time in, they get very educated, and if there is an opportunity for them to assert a psychological claim and work while they're in prison, I mean, we want to protect the good people, but there are bad people too. There are bad people too. And if they could develop a claim of psychological abuse and craft it while they're in prison, we have to guard against that. So the people that are being released, if this becomes law under this provision, are the right people and not the wrong people. And there's nothing wrong with me saying that.
This law has been crafted, passed, and implemented with none of what I understand your concern, because as I said at the beginning of my testimony, I'm a survivor. If the last thing I would want to see is exactly what you're identifying, which is why years of research in terms of who's incarcerated and for what, why, how long, direct interviews with everyone who's incarcerated to identify. I can send you report after report. CPAC backed this bill, and the federal government is backing this bill because we have already given Louisiana what is every other state that got things wrong. You now have the best of all of that learning.
Yeah, and then there's the test of time, too. And some of it, I mean, the test of time of the legislation in other states, and some states have had it longer than others. But Senator Mizell, our job is to make sure we cover the loopholes and that we're making the situation better and not worse. And so just running the traps on the psychological abuse and making sure that we're doing just that. I'd appreciate working with you. I think we all would moving forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sure. Thank you, Senator Cloud. Senator Barrow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Let me just tell you thank you for bringing this bill. I know how much work and time and commitment that it requires, and I can see it all over your face because I know that you have really taken this to heart, and I can feel it. Not only do I see it, but I feel it. And so let me just commend you on that, number one. Secondly, you know, oftentimes good bills never pass in this process. The first time, second time, I had a bill that took literally 30 years. I actually picked it up from someone else and actually carried the torch across the finish line.
I appreciate that, Madam Pro Tem, because I've got a raw milk bill that may never see the light of day.
So I just, you know, I do want to say that it seems like there are some concerns, and it for me. It would be tough for me, but I know how sometimes we have to take the baby steps to kind of get the ball moving and rolling. So, you know, perhaps if seemingly that is causing some angst for some folks, I don't have a problem with it, but that may be something you may want to consider to kind of make sure the bill continues to move through the process.
Thank you, Senator Barrow. We are going to have to take up this bill after adjournment. The Senate President has sent me a couple of warnings. You've seen Lewis come and talk to me a couple of times.
I have seen that.
I don't know if you all are finished testifying. I'm not sure. I don't think there are any others here that wish to speak. I think everybody that wanted to speak in support of the bill wants to speak. I'm going to read in the cards in support, and we're just going to have to save the opposition till after adjournment. It's the best stopping point rather than let them started. So in support, not wishing to speak, Peter Robbins Brown with Louisiana Progress, Hannah Duke, In support, Representative Beth Billings. In support, Laurie Adams, the Pelican Institute. In support, Chris Richardson, Louisiana Coalition Against Domestic Violence. Now we speak Kim Coates. In support, Stephanie O'Rourke, Women for Gun Rights. Tom Costanza, Conference of Catholic Bishops. Fabian Blosh, the Chiefs of Police Association, and Liz Mangum. Smart on Crime, Morgan Lamondre, the Star, Charmaine Cacciopi with United Way, some Southeast Louisiana, Stephen Hard with Lifehouse Church, and Rod Aguilard with Lynn's Homes to something victims. Recover close. And we also have, and she can testify if she wants, Mindy Esquidir. If you're short, we can go now. Otherwise, we'll have to wait till we get back. You can wait because it may be a couple of hours. Okay. All right. Well, we are going to recess for now until after adjournment, and then we will pick back up. So we'll sign off here temporarily. Thank you all for your patience. We're back on Senator Mizell's Senate Bill 152. Senator Mizell, my understanding is you may or may not have a amendment you'd like to offer? Okay.
Staff wants the miracle instantly added, available, and it basically, wherever it says psychological abuse as a component, it's taken out.
Okay.
There you go. I'm having technical difficulties. I'll release it when I got it.
You can give me.
Is it on the internet yet?
As soon as I get it.
Okay. Okay. Why don't you? Is that your description of the amendment? It just takes out the requirement of psychological abuse. So it. Okay. So we have a set of amendments set 1626. Senator Barrow offers up the amendment for adoption. Is there any objection to the amendment? There being no amendment, it's adopted. So that concludes all the proponents of the bill have spoken. Now it's time for the opposition. So if we can get Zach Daniels with the Louisiana District Attorneys Association and whoever else he wants to bring with him. Ms. Russell. So, why don't you give us your testimony, but also, I don't know if you've seen the amendment yet, but you definitely have seen the other amendment. So tell us why you don't think we should pass this bill.
Certainly. I have a copy from Senator Mizell.
He's not on.
Oh, well, yeah. State your name and all the things.
Sure, I can.
Zach Daniels, Executive Director of the Louisiana District Attorneys Association. Mr. Chairman, committee members, I know it has been a long day. I will try to be brief, but I'm in a bit of a unique position, which I will detail why. First of all, I'd like to start by saying thank you to Senator Mizell. I will say that her door has been open to us to hear our issues. Her door has been open. The communication, I think, has flowed very freely between what we feel is a problematic set of issues with this bill, and she has been receptive to it. She's never declined a phone call. She's never refused to respond, and I think that speaks well to a couple of things, namely the statesmanship of the senator, but also in hearing her testify and hearing her speak about this issue over the last several years, I know that her heart is in the right place. In our private communications, generally, I wouldn't delve too deeply into those communications. I can say that she believes in what she is doing, and she has her heart and in the right place. I think that where we disagree, it comes down to some legal issues that are present in the bill. The unique position I described is there are two of us at the table. Earlier in the day, there were a great many district attorneys present, some of whom I have encouraged to email the chairman with their thoughts on the bill, their opposition. Some have confirmed that they were willing to do so and have done so. I will note that in concept, this sounds like a bill that we should all rush to vote for. In concept, where we see people who are victims or survivors of domestic abuse, human trafficking, or sexual abuse that are incarcerated against their abuser, I do think they deserve attention. The concept is often lost, though, in the legalities of what we do. The decisions that are made here are going to impact every judicial district in the state. They're going to impact every district attorney's office in the state. And so where that impact we think will be negative, I can detail for you now. One of the main things that I think fundamentally needs to be corrected is the idea that the clear and convincing evidence standard is the highest standard in Louisiana. Or the highest standard in any state in the country.
That is incorrect.
That is legally false.
Yeah.
The highest standard is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. It's a standard we are familiar with as prosecutors because that's the standard we are held to when convicting people in front of a jury. To argue that this would only impact people who went to trial would be incorrect as well. This is going to impact anyone that feels that they can apply or deserve some relief. Whether that is a floodgate, I do not know. I did request any documentation as to what the Oklahoma bill's impact was. I have not been able to receive that. I have not been able to review that, so I cannot agree or disagree that Oklahoma's district attorneys have been overwhelmed. In discussing this with the Georgia prosecuting attorney, my equivalent in the state of Georgia, it had just recently taken effect, or they were anticipating it taking effect, so I don't think there is any information we can glean from the passage of this bill in Georgia, and to say they have not been overwhelmed when it may not have even taken effect. Again, I struggle when we compare what other states are doing of taking the passage of this bill as an indication that this would be a good idea for this body or this legislature. I would disagree that it is, because we need to solve Louisiana issues, and Louisiana's legal system is distinct from the other legal systems in the country. We are a civil system. We have different approaches to how we approach things. Criminal law tends to be more consistent, but where we are unique, we need to make sure that the solutions in our state are unique. In our discussions with Senator Mizell, and even today, I do not have a completed draft of what we discussed, which was a proposal in concept. I will say that in terms of meeting in the middle, initially we did receive the model draft language. Most of my notes are based off of model language that is not exactly the same as the amendment today. I think some of that is drafting and legislation, some of that is pagination, so I apologize if I don't have the page numbers correct or the line numbers correct in some of the issues I'm presenting. In terms of what we found to be a compromise and that we did offer would be a twofold compromise. One is retaining provisions, retaining the ability of a trial court prospectively. So this is cases that are pending now, but doesn't affect cases that are in the Department of Correction, doesn't affect people on probation, doesn't affect people whose sentences have long been completed and are walking the streets today. It would be prospective and affect current defendants that the judge be mandated to consider most of the factors here, including the psychological abuse. Because while it is difficult to say that it is a necessary ground for resentencing, I do think it would be appropriate for a judge in considering a sentence in 894.1, which is what a judge is mandated to consider. I do think that that would bring headway to this issue. I think that would be a reasonable compromise, and that would be prospective only, which would solve our main issue, is the large number of defendants who may take advantage of this. The second portion of the compromise is to address that, and I think it's been quoted as 42. It's been previously quoted as 30. If there's a list available from proponents, I would very much like to look at that, because we've been requesting that list for years. We have been asking proponents who are saying there are women who are in jail right now, incarcerated for killing their abusers, and that there's a list of them. Can you give it to us? The reason we asked for that is 3 years ago, Code of Criminal Procedure 930.10 existed. It was a code of criminal procedure that this body passed, which would have allowed a prosecutor and a defense attorney to look at those cases in detail and overturn a conviction. It would allow them to look at those cases and look at whether the sentence was appropriate, knowing what we know now, with how domestic abuse functions, with how prevalent human trafficking is. That has now been declared unconstitutional, so we cannot use that tool today. But when it did exist, that list was never provided to us. So whether it's 30, whether it's 40, whether that is the number of people who would get relief under this or would apply for relief, I don't think anyone can sit at this table and tell you how many offenders would apply for relief under a blanket and permissive ability to file for resentencing. If I am sitting in the Department of Corrections, I'm getting 3 hots and a cot, and I have nothing to do but research in the law library, perhaps exercise and work, a job that they give me, and I hear that I could get my sentence overturned. Why would you not take that shot? The second portion of the compromise that we offered addresses that population. It would be to offer a path to clemency. If it is 42 predominantly women who have been incarcerated for killing their abusers, for addressing the violence against them by their traffickers, the parole board is currently structured to give a far more detailed look at each and every one of those cases than your trial court would. I worked post-conviction relief, and that's the Oklahoma bill. It's actually post-conviction relief, not necessarily sentencing. So it's an apples to oranges comparison in many ways to what's being done here. It's different. But as an appellate attorney for many years, what I saw in post-conviction relief was you would get a cold record. You would get thousands of pages of a record, and the judges would say, Zach, you go read that. You tell me what it says, and then we'll look at the petition. And so where you're going to have in a resentencing the same structure, it will be a heavy burden to review the thousands of pages of records, if they exist, by the prosecuting office for each and every one of these cases that are filed, because each and every prosecutor I have ever spoken to, each and every district attorney that I have ever spoken to on this issue says, let's get the names. If there are women in the Department of Corrections who are in the Department of Corrections for killing their abusers, let's find them. Let's look at it. If we have made errors, we need to address them. But what I will say is the current resentencing structure in the amended bill does not accomplish that in a very fine-toothed way. I keep hearing the language is tight. And I would like to take a couple moments to describe to you why I do not agree with that whatsoever. Much like I don't agree with clear and convincing evidence being the highest standard, I think it's legally incorrect to describe it that way. A resentencing fundamentally reopens the case. It allows a judge in certain situations to reopen a case. And what I mean by that is after direct appeal, a case is deemed final. The approaches are different. The burden for post-conviction, challenging after an appeal your conviction, is on the petitioner. When you reopen a sentencing, you likely entitle each and every one of these defendants to be represented. Senator Barrow, I know you often have talked about how difficult accessing the courts, understanding court records might be. I think I heard you say that when in relation to a bill earlier this session, is that understanding or accessing the records could be difficult for people that don't have a safe place to store their record in Department of Corrections. The resentencing would take that into account because each and every one of these defendants would likely be entitled to an attorney under Louisiana's law. There's also an appeal of right on this bill as amended. The appeal of right exists at the end of the 880.8 resentencing. An appeal is different than a writ. So if a defendant loses a challenge claiming that their attorney was not competent in post-conviction relief, they take a writ. That allows the higher courts to look at just the record and say yes or no, whether or not they will accept it. Upon conviction, once I convict a murderer, he has an appeal of right from that conviction. What that does is force the appellate courts to look at the entire case. They have no discretion to deny an appeal of right. So when we say that the clearly false petitions will be taken and thrown in the trash can, that is legally incorrect for the state of Louisiana. Each and every denied petition will be entitled to an attorney, and if it is deemed a fundamental stage, which one of our sharpest appellate attorneys out of Jefferson Parish has been texting with me all day researching this, it's unclear. But I believe, and he believes, that it would be an essential stage of a criminal prosecution. So not only do they get an attorney appointed for the resentencing hearing, whether or not it is granted as a hearing. They will also likely be entitled to counsel for our overburdened appellate attorneys. Most of these are going to be indigent. They will not be able to afford attorneys. So when we say we're simply discarding or throwing away the clearly invalid petitions, that's legally incorrect in Louisiana's law. And I will point that out to you because where you're making decisions on how the law functions, what is legally accurate for this state is far more important than the success or failure of a bill in another state. When there is an appeal of right, again, the higher courts are forced to review this. They have no discretion, even if it's clearly false, even if they failed to meet any of the evidentiary requirements of this bill. But as you look at it, it will also likely open a whole new body of case law in a civil case, and I will absolutely take correction from a civil attorney if I'm incorrect on this. Appeals are treated differently. Appeals are treated differently in terms of how the appellate court looks at the facts versus the law. There's a far greater limitation on the appellate courts for criminal convictions. So it will be very unclear how the appellate courts handle this type of resentencing. But if a person is granted relief, only the defendant gets an appeal in this bill. The state cannot challenge that. Technically, this is a resentencing, so even if it's denied, the original sentence would have to be reimposed at the end of a hearing. That is legally how this would function in Louisiana. I believe an appellate right, an appeal right, might attach right there. I don't know, and where attorneys are sitting here in front of legislators saying, I don't know how this would function, I think there's a danger there when we're changing Louisiana's law and opening a door in this fashion. I would urge you to take care. If no one can clearly answer for you how big an impact this would be, I would urge you to pause and really consider what we are doing. And I know that the senator's intentions are very good, but where we continue to run into these legal defects, these legal disagreements, and we continue to pass bills that have unknowns, we raise the danger. I do believe that the breadth of this means that people who are sitting in the Department of Corrections that feel they don't want to be in prison will likely file. Another area that I will point out, it was described in the 890.4 sentencing that there would be a whole list of things you must prove. So right now I'm on page 3 of the amendment. At the bottom, D1 through D2. So I want to draw your attention to the difference here between what a standard of proof is and what this portion of the bill does. A standard of proof is what a person who wants relief here.
What amendment are you on?
I am on
1175. Page 3.
Thank you, Senator. Where a standard of proof exists, that is going to tell the judge what standard they must hold the person who's asking for a judgment in their favor must meet. In D1, a defendant who moves to be sentenced under paragraph C of this article shall provide corroborating evidence. Shall is good. It means they must. But shall provide corroborating evidence. That's one of the most broad terms that we have in the Code of Evidence. Corroboration is a legal term. What it means is that it is more or less likely to establish a fact. So you corroborate at trial. You corroborate when one witness says it this way, A, B, and C happened, and one witness says, I only saw A and B. The two witnesses corroborate each other. That paragraph does not mean that the court record must prove that this person was a victim of abuse. They must merely provide one. What I would do if I were serving a life sentence for killing my wife and I wanted to claim relief here, I would never do so, for the record. I'm very happily married. In case she's watching, very happily married. But I would look at this, I would say, Judge, I will file my own court record into the record for resentencing. I've satisfied the mandatory evidence here. It does nothing. Every single defendant would do that. But I'll also encourage you to listen or think back to other testimony that we've heard. We, especially last year, and when Senator Barrow, when you ran a broader bill, we heard from a lot of victims that they said a lot of things about how their abusers would coerce them. An abuser will coerce, in my experience in prosecuting domestic violence, an abuser will coerce their victim to recant, to lie, to say the violence didn't happen, to say that the victim was the aggressor. They will encourage them, and that will be documented in police reports. There's nothing in this statute that requires what's being submitted to be true. There's no scrutiny there. It's a paper shield. And what I mean by that is it looks good, and you might argue there's a heavy list of things that must be proven. Nothing here requires that any of these documents prove the claim. They just must be submitted as a technical requirement to file for resentencing. Again, I'll think back to where I've had domestic violence victims who say he went into divorce court and he lied to the judge. He encouraged my children to lie against me. These are stories we hear all the time from abuse victims. As district attorneys and assistant district attorneys, we're in court defending them every day. These are stories that we hear, and a divorce court record, you're never going to see whether or not it was true or it's a lie, but it would satisfy the burden here as being one of the documents technically required to be filed. I point that out because that's not a list of evidence that's required to win one of these. It's a list of items that must be filed that's very broad, that checks a check mark. A filing requirement is how I would look at this. It does nothing to require that any of us prove any of the claim. And as I kind of finish with my remarks, and I'm happy to answer any questions, I would draw your attention to the Code of Evidence and the expert testimony that's on page 4 of the same set of amendments we were discussing. I would say proceed with extreme caution anytime that we are looking at expertise and expert witnesses and how courts are ordered by this legislature to handle expert witnesses. Right now, they are already able to be produced. A domestic abuse battery expert who can describe the cycle of domestic abuse, that's admissible right now. But when we change the language, the courts are going to assume you meant something different than already exists. That's an assumption they'll make. Why change the language if you're not changing anything about it? So where we open up expert testimony, or where we suggest that these experts might be able to testify to an ultimate fact, to guilt or innocence, here's the danger that we run into. We run into a danger that an expert who's been highly paid, who can appear and confuse the jury, is going to be able to get someone off of a conviction that has nothing to do with guilt or innocence. In civil courts, you see it more often where you have a battle of experts. One spine doctor says there is an injury that's cost this much, one spine doctor says there's not. And we very much try to protect the criminal proceedings from that type of expert duel, because not only is it expensive and burdensome, but it confuses juries away from the guilt or innocence, which is the question they're there to answer. So I would say that there are a number of very dangerous things in this bill. The language isn't as clean as was described. I will disagree with that from a legal perspective. And I do believe, 2 additional points, there's nothing in this bill to stop someone from filing a petition for resentencing, having it denied, taking an appeal, having their attorney, and then a month after they get everything denied, they file another one, and another one, and another one, and another one. There's no prohibition, like with post-conviction relief or protection for the DA's offices, where they have already won against stopping the same thing from happening over and over. There's no prohibition here, like in post-conviction relief, where you must be incarcerated. Someone who looks at their conviction from 30 years ago, where records do not exist anymore. They've all been destroyed. We would have no ability to meaningfully challenge whether or not they were a victim. We would have to rely, and the court would end up relying on their testimonial evidence. It's a danger that we see, and it's a danger that occurs every time there's retroactive application or relief in the law. I will say that I do think that this bill poses a danger. I will compliment again Senator Mizell for the effort that she has put into this concept. She is working, as Senator Barrow did, to advance a cause that she believes in. But I believe that as drafted and as amended, this is a very dangerous bill to present, and I would ask you to oppose this bill. Thank you.
Okay, Senator Barrow for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so, Mr. Mitchell, I want to make sure I clear this up, because when I said that this bill was narrowly written, I was comparing it to mine. And so compared to the bill that I had, it is very narrowly written compared to what I actually introduced for the past 2 years. Certainly, you bring up a couple things that I have some questions about. But one of the things that you just stated was about the 30 years in the records. This bill only goes back 3 years, and you said it's not going to be beyond the 3 years.
So the way I read the bill, Senator, is that it would allow a person to file in the next 3 years. I don't believe it's limited to the last 3 years of convictions for relief. I don't think there's any end cap to say this is when you must file. Your conviction must have been on or after this date. My reading is that the 3-year period is the 3 years that they have to file for relief.
Okay, that's not, I need to get my bill if I can actually look at it, but that was not my understanding of it. I'm gonna come back.
Thank you,
I'm come
Senator.
back, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Let me get my stuff together.
Okay, thank you, Senator Barrow. Senator Cloud, wait, no, who's next? Senator Cloud is next.
You outlined I am not an attorney, but just having gotten my just dipping my toes in all of this over the last few years, the things that you talked about are things that I'm really concerned about. And again, I said earlier, having been in the prison systems and seeing, I mean, they have what looks like law libraries, and they said, particularly I have 3 prisons in one of my state prisons. They sit and research laws all day long, and good for them. Honestly, good for them. I would do the exact same thing, but those that I realize that they're oftentimes looking for relief from their incarceration. I also noticed the repetitive nature of being able to just perpetually assert this law if it would become law for a motion of sentence reduction. Another thing that I think is going to be just maybe questioned is just and it's not competency, it's not the word that I'm looking for, but the court being able to effectively weigh all of the evidence, having the staff to go through the records, and basically what you said was something that I didn't contemplate is basically retry the case. I mean, that is a high burden, and I don't think in order to give the relief that we all would want for those that are incarcerated who were victims, I think we just want them to have justice and relief, but not through all these channels. We want an easier, better, more effective, proven channel. And I had talked to you about a proposal, a few of us did, a proposal of using a system that has been tested and proven over the years, and that's through our parole board. And so if you could just speak to the proposal that you have made to get to the end goal, which is relief for victims, sentencing relief for victims without disrupting our entire system and opening the potential to putting other victims in a precarious situation if they're, I don't know, maybe former husband or former wife is released from prison. Anyway, could you speak to the proposal?
Certainly. And I before I do talk about clemency and the pardon board, I would like to compliment how you described that, functionally having to retry the case. I think that is what would occur. And I would remind you of something. This is an essential stage of a prosecution. So not only are you entitled to an attorney, as the state, I could not compel, if you filed for relief under this, I could not compel you to testify against yourself. I could not force a criminal defendant trying to get relief under this to testify. They could make whatever claims, attestations, affidavits they want, and I could not force them to testify. In terms of clemency, Texas has a law that has existed far longer than Oklahoma or Georgia. So in terms of a tested system, I think Texas would fall into that category. I believe it was passed in 2020. Our draft, and I'll use that with my staff attorney present in the room in quotation marks because she was working very diligently to try and acknowledge, understand, process what Texas does and get it into a fashion that your staff attorneys would not yell at us for without just copying and pasting the whole statute. The process of parole, the process of clemency, the process by which that board would be involved in the proposal that we suggested would be that a person would be in the Department of Corrections. So everyone on the street, we take care of that issue. The repetitive applications, there's a rule in place that takes care of that issue with the pardon board. The people who are not allowed to apply, That is taken care of with the existing structure of the pardon board. They would apply as many do, and if we create a special statute, there could even be a special application for them to apply for relief under certain conditions, and it would be largely the same conditions that are currently listed in the bill. You know what, I can't speak as to what we would take a position for, but even psychological abuse I don't think would be offensive, because the pardon board is oriented in a far more different fashion than a trial court judge. A district court judge, again, is going to see the cold record. The pardon board's bread and butter, what they do every day, if you have never seen one, is they hold hearings. They contact victims. They have an entire victims assistance coordinator branch to make sure the voice of the victim is heard, which is important and wouldn't further burden the state. I've loosely spoken to Francis Abbott, the executive director of the pardon board, and he says that the concept we are talking about, again, in concept, wouldn't be immediately overburdensome to his board. I don't want to quote him too heavily there because his language was a little different, but first blush, first look at it, he didn't think it would overwhelm them. They would be able to give really detailed looks at all of these cases, hearing from witnesses who might not be able to come forward at trial, family members, people the district court under a resentencing may choose to keep out because they're not relevant to the crime itself. And that's the focus of resentencing under this bill. The pardon board, the function of pardon, the function of commutation is that of grace. That is the legal definition our courts have adopted. Commutation and pardon, they're a form of grace. The executive branch, having that authority, removes judges, removes district attorneys from many ways. We still have the right to be notified. We still have the right to appear and advocate for victims, as district attorneys always do. But it would be a far more regulated fashion and an infrastructure that is already set up to weed out false claims. If you've heard a pardon board, you'll hear people that 2-3 years into their longer sentence, they say, I'm rehabilitated, I'm ready to get out. And the pardon board will say, let's talk to you.
Yeah.
Let's compel you to testify, Mr. Defendant. Let's hear not only whether you are a victim, but what steps you've taken afterwards, what motivations you had at the time of the crime, what motivations you have now. And one of the biggest things that a judge who sat on the pardon board recently always found as an important factor is the level of culpability that the offender is able to acknowledge. And whether that is for a real victim, for a real survivor, whether that is acknowledging that they did commit a crime, whether that was for duress, whether that was for coercion, there was a wrong that was committed, and figuring out what that means and making amends there. The district court is not set up to do that. A district court is a contradictory process by which the defense is going to have to argue under their ethical obligations certain things. The prosecution, under our ethical obligations, we will have to oppose in most situations. So I would say the infrastructure of the clemency path that was outlined by Texas, that has been in existence far longer than Georgia's law, far longer than Oklahoma's law, I think is a far more tenable.
Did you say, Mr. Daniels, that the bulk of the qualifying factors, we'll call them in the bill, for the hearing, for the consideration of a reduced sentence, you've kept the bulk of the qualifying factors in the heart of the bill? You've just changed the venue.
Yes, I would agree with that. Again, I can't say we've kept because it's only half types, but the factors in here, even the ones that we would disagree with as to resentencing, for clemency, again, the purpose of clemency, the look that clemency and the parole board and pardon board gives is different. And so a lot of the things that would be problematic in a district court, we would be able to retain the goals that Senator Mizell has in this original bill and amended bill.
One of the concerns that Senator Mizell has expressed is, would they ever get a hearing, or how long could it take? What if they were unjustly incarcerated and it might take 5 years to actually get a hearing and get justice, and so they're serving hard labor for 5 years for protecting themselves? What protections in the bill are there, or protections that we can add that would guarantee in some appropriate time frame for someone that is qualified for this kind of a hearing, that they actually do it in an appropriate amount of time?
I think we would have to be very precise with our language. I don't think it's impossible, but we would functionally need to be mandating that these claims be processed in a certain order. I'll remind you that in the special crime session, the Pardon Board was mandated to take the applications in the order that they come. So it is a concern. It is a very real concern. I can't speak as to Senator Mizell or her issues.
But it's something that we can do. Like, we can prescribe some time frames that are appropriate and non-burdensome on the parole board, but still offer justice to victims.
Correct. Whether it's mandated in the bill and spelled out, or whether it's ordering them to promulgate rules to ensure that this category of special application is handled in a more timely fashion, or as an exception. I would say you would have to craft an exception to the special rule, or the rule passed in the special crime session last year.
Okay. Well, I think that the intent of the bill is praiseworthy. I mean, there's very, very good rationale behind it, a very good intention behind it, and I hope we're able to continue to work on proceeding with the bill without disrupting the system and opening ourselves up to creating new dangerous situations for communities.
Thank you, Senator.
Thanks, Senator Cloud. Senator Hodges.
Mr. Chairman, I just have a couple of questions. You did a great job explaining that.
Thank you, Senator.
I had one question. You said that, I think you said somebody had gone and asked for the list of names. Who did you go to ask for that list?
I'm now blanking on the attorney's name. I believe he works with the Tulane Law Clinic that does their outreach at the women's prison. And I'm very apologetic for this description. He has got a foreign name, Stanislav, I believe was his name, who testified.
He's actually here.
Oh.
He put in a green card, but he did it too late. We were already on the opposition. We've already heard from the proponents of the bill. But in any event, just FYI.
May I ask a brief question?
Sure.
Where's your name from?
I was born in Ukraine.
Again, I abhor the description I gave to it upon confirmation from it, a very respectable and Ukrainian name. So I apologize.
Okay,
to him
so
about the initial
you asked
description.
him for the list. Mr. Chairman, could we ask him about that list? I'm curious because that's what this whole bill is about, getting justice for the victims. And Zach said that they went and were not provided with the list. I think that's super important that we can identify that. So would you mind if he answers that question?
I'll permit it. Sir, if you'll come forward and...
Hello, everyone. My name is Stanislav Moroz. I just wanted to clarify. I am so while I am employed at Tulane, I'm not speaking on behalf of Tulane. I'm just speaking on behalf of myself. But my profession is I'm a professor. I teach domestic violence and criminal justice, and I work with incarcerated survivors of abuse. So the population that this bill would affect. So the issue is, so we get applications from survivors who want our services.
Let's get to the heart of it. Do you have a list?
That's what I'm explaining. I promise.
Do you have it or not? Yes or no?
I need more than yes or no, but I can give you in 2 sentences. I can explain.
Okay, 2 sentences.
So we get applications of people who apply for our services, so I can estimate based on the number of applications we get how many people would potentially fall under these criteria, but I can't share confidential names, and I haven't screened all the cases.
I wouldn't want you to either.
And out of those people, I ran the numbers again a couple months ago. I saw 46 people, which if everything they said was true, I believe would fit into a bill like this.
Okay.
So can't you, when you interview these people, can't you get them to give you permission to give it to the district attorney? Or the District Attorneys Association?
This is just based on written applications. We conduct a very thorough interview with each person, and we have a very thorough screening process. So I'm not.
Can't you just put on during your screening process? Will you let us share this information?
That would not be part of the screening process for any
Why
defense
wouldn't you
program.
put that in there?
If you were, as a someone who represents clients who are incarcerated, we were not gathering any sort of information.
But this is a chance for them to get clemency and maybe get out of jail. You don't think they would want to give up their anonymity in order to have the chance to get out of jail?
That's an individualized conversation I would have with every
But
single.
common sense
Applied for
tells
it.
you.
Apparently, they're wanting it. So that's the next step. What happens to that list? What happens to the names on that list? What do you do with that list?
So I very carefully look at the list, and then I have, if I believe that someone may be eligible for some form of relief, I have in-depth conversations and screening. I don't just forward something to a district attorney because that wouldn't be, in my opinion, ethical behavior by an attorney.
Is there do you give
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Well,
you go ahead.
No, well, just one more question on that. So if they applied for some type of clemency, obviously they want that. So do you give them do you tell them, do you want to proceed? That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah. So if someone applies for clemency and then we represent them on that clemency, I would ask them if they wanted me to share their
How
information
many
with the
have
district
you
attorney.
actually moved forward on applying for clemency out of those 46?
I think we've maybe represented around, I want to say, 7 or 8 people in clemency.
And what happened with those? I don't want names or any specifics. Did they get it?
Some of them got clemency and will be on parole for maybe over 70 more years. Some didn't get clemency.
Okay. And what year was that in?
We started this in 2020. So, and then since then, we've been representing some folks on clemency.
Okay, so I just had one more question, and I don't know if you can answer it, because, and I see both sides, and so I'm very torn about this, because you said that they would apply, not these 46, but potentially if we pass this bill, and they would apply and reapply, and they would apply and then reapply. But to me, when Senator Barrow said it was narrow, I think domestic abuse, sexual assault, and we're not doing psychological, but now it's domestic abuse, sexual abuse, and human trafficking. Doesn't there have to be the burden on the person that's asking for the retrial it has to be related to these 3 things?
So I would say that the bill, so you're asking now on the resentencing bill that is currently in the amended posture and what they would be required to prove.
Yes.
When
because of your concerns about,
Yes.
and we don't want to open the floodgates to some court somewhere that would just say, oh, well, everybody apply and we'll get you 1,000 people out of jail. That's not the point here.
Certainly. So what I would say is I'll draw this analogy for you, or a description, is that when a prosecutor files a charge, so when an ADA and a district attorney files charges to accuse someone of domestic abuse, in order to get the conviction, either they plead guilty or we must prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. The bill requires that they establish that they were a victim of that experience. I'm going to point out a nuanced concept at the end of this, but I'm going to try and give you the most direct answer. It is not the same as saying they would have the equal burden that a district attorney would have to prove a crime. They must simply establish their existence as a person who has experienced domestic violence, human trafficking, and again, psychological abuse has been removed. I practiced it that way, so I may repeat it if it's been removed. So it is a lower burden than to convict somebody. It is a lower burden than a jury may have found a person. So the issue that I have here is a defendant, say it's a contested divorce is going on, a male defendant, female victim, he shoots and kills her. It's a very common story that we have in Louisiana. I've prosecuted several. He could claim at trial self-defense. The state must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he committed the murder, and we must disprove self-defense. He could then turn around on this and claim, well, I know I said it was self-defense, but really I'm a victim. I'm a victim of this, and he would have a much lower burden to prove that he experienced domestic violence, that he experienced human trafficking, or whatever his claim was. And I will assert back to what I said earlier, the number of drop charge requests I have seen in domestic violence cases where victims come in and say, please let him go, he's the breadwinner. Please let him go, he's the father of my children, is staggering.
Yeah.
It is staggering, and many of them know. If they've been arrested for domestic violence before, I know it's not just going to be a request to dismiss the charges. The victim is going to come in, because I'll go listen to the jail calls and the defendant's telling them to do this. The victim's going to come in and say, I hit him first. He will have been able, through that drop charge, that may be a lie, to establish that he's qualified for resentencing under this bill. That is why the Clemency or Pardon Board would be a far better, more detailed look at it And I think I've gotten a little away from your underlying question, but I was trying to give you the full perspective we have here as to where the problem exists.
Well, thank you. That definitely clears it up, and I hope that you can speed up that process. If someone, the victims that we're talking about who are, as the perpetrators, don't need to be sitting in prison if they were defending themselves for their life or their children. And to sit in jail one day more than they have to is too many.
And I will say we try to represent people as much as we can. The wait time to get a clemency hearing, first of all, currently if you're serving a life without parole sentence, you can't even apply for clemency until you've served 15 years. And then after that, there's a period, the pardon board works very hard. They have a lot on their plate. And so the period to get a hearing is over a year after that. And so we do as much as we can.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. Appreciate the work that you're doing to help these victims, and hope you can continue to do that.
Thank you.
Just out of curiosity, Mr. Is it Moro?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Moros.
Moros.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, been practicing my Ukrainian lately. So these people that you assist with, are they you're an attorney, I take it?
Yes, sir.
And are they your clients?
We'll screen a case and then we'll represent people, and we're a clinic, so students will help with that.
I see. But you take on all the obligations of a defense counsel.
Yes.
When you do that.
Well, with some folks, we have limited representation agreements, so maybe we'll represent some folks just for a clemency hearing or just for post-conviction, but
I
yes.
see. Okay. I mean, I'm just wondering if you had the obligation to try to do whatever you could to get them out of jail. Do you feel
yes,
like
and I very much do that, I promise you.
Regardless of whether they're innocent or not.
Well, we screen a case, so we screen someone to determine if we believe that their incarceration is closely linked to their abuse. So it's not like a public defender program where we just represent everyone.
So a lot of them, you tell them, we don't really think you were abused, or it wasn't linked to your committing the crime.
We look very carefully for corroborating evidence and what came out at trial, and we work with domestic violence experts to evaluate that closely. We have limited resources and want to ensure that we are strictly representing domestic violence victims who are incarcerated because of the abuse.
So out of all the applicants, and you've said there's been 50, 60, something like that, applications, is that right?
I said that out of the applications we've received, it looks, if just on their face from the applications, about 46 people may be eligible.
But you haven't pursued anything on behalf of them, only 6 or 7?
No, we've pursued more than 6 or 7. I think we've had over 10 people get out.
You've had over 10 people get out, or you've pursued it?
Get out, and we've pursued a few more than that. Yeah.
A few more, so...
I don't know the exact numbers, but we've pursued...
But you've screened them and said a lot of them are like, you don't have a case, or we don't think you're...
It's just, we screen very carefully, so it'll take me a while to screen a case before we accept it.
I see. So, but you turn a lot of people down. That's my point. I'm asking.
We turn some people down. Some people are just on our wait list.
I see.
It has to do with also what their procedural posture is. So if they have a clemency hearing coming up, we can represent them for a clemency. Most survivors don't have a clemency hearing coming up in the subsequent years and are time barred and have no ability to seek post-conviction relief. So they have no way of getting back into court, which is the point of legislation like this, that there are survivors who maybe were convicted 20, 30 years ago under an understanding of domestic violence that we would all find abhorrent today, but just don't have a mechanism to go into court. And as Mr. Daniels correctly said, we used to have the 930.10 provision, which would allow for negotiations where we could screen cases jointly with district attorneys' offices, but we can no longer do that.
But bottom line is, if you have so many people that you think might deserve relief, and you haven't alerted any of the DAs that they deserve it, that seems like I would be mad at you personally if I was in jail, but be that as it may, Senator Barrow has some questions, so we'll get to her.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Attorney Morales is a professor.
Whichever. Thank you, Senator.
Yes. And I want to thank you so much for all of your work. I think we need to clarify something so that everybody can quite really understand this. And we saw firsthand, I saw the look in the women's faces when we were there. Many of them, and so y'all, you know who they are, but they do not want their names released. Many of them are very afraid or fearful. They don't want to become a target, which we know can happen when you are incarcerated. And they have watched other cases. This is what we heard when we were there. Individuals who seemingly had done all the right things, had gotten all the right paperwork, had done everything they needed to do, and then it was still rejected. So as I listened to some of them, they just kind of lost hope, and they are not even applying anymore for what you guys actually provide because they don't have the hope that they would ever get out. The system, in their opinion, and in some of our opinion, I'm not going to say everybody, but maybe mine, have failed some of them. So can you just really kind of dispel that, because I think that needs to be clarified.
Yes. I mean, people are in a very, very vulnerable positions. It's very scary. It's very scary to put your name out there. It's very scary to think that people are going to target you either in the prison or outside of the prison. I think, as those of us who work a lot with domestic violence victims know, there's this misconception that survivors are going to exaggerate abuse or lie about abuse. What's much, much more common is that survivors will be afraid to disclose the abuse. And that's been our experience. We've had survivors say, it wasn't that bad. And then we've seen medical records, that showed truly how bad it was. It showed people having to go to the ER. And so I'm sure some of the folks from the DA's offices see this too when they're prosecuting cases. There'll be a survivor that says it wasn't so bad, but they know how truly bad it was, and so it's really scary.
You can't convict somebody if the victim says it wasn't bad or recants their testimony. That's the problem that the DAs are facing, trying to prosecute these cases. So there's been a lot of complaints I've heard during the testimony today. They're not prosecuting enough cases for domestic violence. There's only been this many convictions for sex trafficking, but you have to have evidence. And it's not just a little evidence, it's a lot of evidence. It's a lot because you have to prove it to the highest standard. The real highest standard, not the one that's been bandied about as the highest standard, which is beyond a reasonable doubt. But in any event, I digress. I'm sorry, Senator Barrow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, which brings me to my point in why this is happening. Because if you don't have the wherewithal, if you don't know, that's number one. First, you don't know what you don't know. You don't know how to proceed through the process. If you don't have anyone to help you, then that's not going to happen. And so therefore, those cases never really elevate to the point. And when you are not the breadwinner, when you're not making the most money, you learn how to survive. It's called survival. And so that's what oftentimes happens. And we are kind of digressing a little bit, but that's how we get to this point. And that's why people are in these situations. And that's why we need to do something to address the bigger picture. But I do want to go to this question for you, Mr. Mitchell, as it relates to Texas. You referred to the process. I'm sorry. Yeah, Mr. Mitchell. Yeah.
Please call me Zach.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. Well, no, I'm not, Mr. Mitchell.
My last name is Daniels, Senator.
What is it?
Daniels.
Oh, my God. Where did I get Mitchell from?
Please call me Zach.
I don't know where I got Mitchell from. Zach. So going back to Texas, which I think you said has been in effect since 2020?
Yes, ma'am.
So what data do you have from them, and how is that process actually working?
That would require an in-depth look. Right now, I cannot tell you how many cases they've accepted, how many cases that they've, I guess you can't even call it adjudicated, processed and made a decision on, or how many people have gotten relief from it. I'd be happy, and I would commit to you to get those answers for you, likely through our own executive director for the Board of Pardon and Committee on Parole, Francis Abbott, because I think if I had to guess, he knows the person in Texas that does his job. So I couldn't commit to you one way or the other in the same fashion that I haven't seen the data from any other state.
But you believe that process is working there?
Again, I said that it is a process toward clemency. Without any data, I would struggle to answer that for you.
Okay, because I see some nods behind you going like, nah. Okay.
If there were problems, I would anticipate that they would have been processed through the court system at this time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Barrow. Let's have Ms. Porter come to the table. Cordia Porter, is she here?
I'm happy to convey her thoughts to you. She has a child that she's required to care for and is not able to be here.
You can depart the table. Thank you, because we are on opposition. Yeah, I'm going to get Ms. Russell. Yeah, you're next. I was just going to get all the opponents to the bill that wanted to speak in front of us. So state your name and give us your testimony, please.
Evening. Christine Rosso, President of the LDAA, also District Attorney for the Parish of Lafourche. Note that I let the smart lawyer go first. The District Attorney always goes second. He really, I think Zach did a great job covering clemency and what our thoughts were. So I just want to talk about what I see in the bill in a courtroom going forward and the issues that I see. And I find it odd actually sitting here because for 23 years I've been fighting for victims. I handled sex crimes for 18 years. I served on the Child Abuse Task Force with Senator Barrow. I've served on the Human Sex Trafficking Committee. Michelle Johnson, I know her very well, as well as Senator Barrow, and I respect all the work that they do and the things that they say. So I will continue to fight for victims. What I'm telling you today is I'm not asking you to vote against women and children. I'm asking you to vote no on this bill as it's written because we can do better. And so that's what we're asking you today. And I want to tell you why I feel that way. I think, Senator Hodges, you mentioned about how we've come so far when it comes to human sex trafficking and education. We have, and I've seen it in my office as well, how we didn't know what sex trafficking was, and so we are hearing these cases. But now as we're sitting here in 2025, it sure looks different when we go to trainings. It looks different in every district attorney's office, and if you ask law enforcement when they investigate cases, it certainly looks a lot different. And so you're correct on that. And so moving forward, I see that we are just getting better and better when it comes to investigation and when it comes to prosecution. But the things that I'm seeing with this bill that concern me, first is this. When you look at saying, because of trauma, because the woman suffered this trauma, because this sex trafficking victim suffered this trauma, well then, we need to not hold them as responsible. We need to change what the sentencing range is. Fine. But you have to at least continue that argument if we're going to accept that. And if you're going to accept that, then what about the 5-year-old boy who was raped? And then at 17, he becomes a rapist, and he rapes boys down the street from him. I mean, he suffered trauma, and now he committed offenses, and he went through a lot of his upbringing. I'm sure we can think of a lot of examples. I can give you a lot of examples of cases of that. But so next session, someone will be sitting here saying, well, what about him? What about and I can tell you almost every murder that I have handled, when the defense talks about that person's upbringing, I can tell you on a death penalty case that I had when they sat there, when it came to that phase when they had the mother on there, they talked about the trauma that defendant, that murderer had growing up. So that had something to do absolutely with the choices that they made. Absolutely the trauma that 5-year-old boy had, that had an influence on the behavior that he had later. So I don't think if we accept the argument as is and as written, we have to continue that argument then with all. And are we there where we're going to say anyone who has had trauma, then we have to make sure that they have a minimum and maximum on their rank. And I'm worried about that slippery slope. I'm really worried about all victims, not just women, not just children. I mean, all victims. And I think there's a way that we can do it. Let's talk about men in domestic abuse relationships. Almost every case that we have had where a woman has been abused, in those reports, somewhere in there, he tells the law enforcement, she hit me too. She's got a bite mark or whatever. There is some, now again, I think we can all agree, she is the weaker sex. I think we can all accept that fact. But we also
We
have
listen to the testimony? Okay.
we also have to realize that he will then present the same thing that she will, that he was a victim of domestic abuse. And it's going to be in the report, and there is nothing that we can do about it if we use the language in the bill as it's drafted. I mean, trauma is complex, and we keep talking about physical and sexual and all that, but we have to continue. If we're going to say trauma, and we're going to talk, even if you take out psychological abuse, you can't stop there. Because people behave a certain way for many different reasons, not just coercion, not just abuse, for many, many different reasons. One of the things that you said, Senator Barrow, you talked about, you're concerned about women who can't afford lawyers, and so they're sitting in jail. Then in the bill, we can't guarantee they're going to get a good lawyer to go and prove something beyond a clear and convincing evidence. That has nothing to do with the bill. That is about ineffective assistance of counsel, but this bill is not going to correct your worries. It won't. I'm also afraid that we are going to get into that slippery slope while we're not holding anybody truly accountable at some point. And what do I mean by that? I don't mean that we should not listen. Michelle's story is horrible, and there are many victims that we can talk about moving forward. I think we need to draft something that allows everyone to address it and have a judge listen to it and put whatever weight he wants to on it, which is why we proposed a sentencing guideline which would say a judge shall consider. And you can put psychological abuse, you can put physical abuse, you can put all of it. Then a judge in his discretion can give it the weight that he chooses to give it, and then can sentence him accordingly. And that means not just women, not just children. I'm talking about all victims. And just that, in 894.1, just adding that a judge shall consider all the things they want to consider, and a judge could then at that point use his discretion and go down off the mandatories and do what he wants to do. And that's what we have judges for, to use their discretion. They give it as much weight as they want to give it. And that will allow the men that we're afraid of that may use it, and they're really the true abusers, this will cure that. So I say all that to say, I am not here telling you to say no to any of these people that testified. I would never sit here and tell you that, because I'm going to continue to fight for them every single day. What I'm telling you is the bill as it is written should be voted no, because it's not going to do what we need to do to truly protect victims.
Thank you for your testimony. I'd just like to go over a few things that the bill is and the bill is not. There's been a lot of concern expressed about not enough child sex trafficking convictions. This bill isn't going to increase sex trafficking convictions. Maybe we need more. I don't know why we don't have more than we do. I don't know if those who are complaining about it are saying the DAs are doing a bad job, DAs are no good, DAs won't prosecute it, or whether there's inherent problems with prosecuting that case. But this bill has nothing to do with whether or not DAs are properly prosecuting cases, and it won't help that even if it passes in any form. Another thing I'd like to clarify is that judges right now, under a pre-sentencing investigation and report, can consider and look at, they're not mandated to look at, whether the accused was a subject of domestic violence or some other sort of trauma. But they can look at it, and quite often they take that into account when considering, and it varies. Judges have a lot of discretion. Sometimes we take some of that discretion away. In addition, and I know it's been mentioned, but all the defenses and all the protections that our Constitution, both state and federal, provide are significant. Everybody that's accused of a crime has the right to force witnesses to come and testify. Every criminal defendant has the right to try to prove, or they don't even have the obligation to prove. They can assert self-defense, defense of others, justifiable homicide, etc. And the nature of our criminal law, Lady Justice is blindfolded, right? A lot of times there can be a really bad person that's innocent of the crime. That's why we don't allow all these other types of evidence in that don't relate to the crime. The question for the jury is, did you commit the crime? Did the state prove beyond a reasonable doubt the essential elements of a crime? And they're usually, you got to prove specific intent to kill in a second-degree murder case. Specific intent to kill in a, you understand, it's basic criminal law. And that's why we don't let in all that other stuff, because you could be, a lot of convictions wouldn't occur, or they would occur wrongfully if a lot of other evidence was let in that's not relevant to whether they commit the crime or not. Now, that's not a question, that's kind of a speech, but if you have any response to that, I welcome it, and then I'm going to recognize Senator Barrow for some more questions.
Just briefly, Senator, or Mr. Chairman, I would agree with you that where we are looking at other evidence that doesn't have to do with guilt or innocence, or where we are allowing additional evidence to be presented in front of a jury, getting 12 people to agree today, I'll be honest, I don't think I'm going to get the 5 of you to agree today. Getting 12 people on a jury to agree today is very difficult. And where the defense is allowed to use these levers, that becomes more and more difficult. I will say, justifiable homicide, self-defense. Last year, we helped run a bill that put the burden more on the state because it was unclear and it looked unfair at a certain situation. So we don't shy away from our burden. It's the first thing I say to a jury every single time, hold me to my burden. It's the last thing I say to a jury every single time I've tried a case, hold me to my burden. What we assert is whether or not it is more or less difficult to hold those accountable, and I do think this bill may make it more difficult, and it would open up some very old and well-healed wounds. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. Senator Barrow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Assistant DA, I did want to go back to something that was stated, and when I was making a comment, I wasn't talking about currently, I'm talking about like what has happened in the past that has gotten us to this point as it relates to the poor representation that oftentimes, and I've seen it more among women or individuals from a social economic income where they don't have the means, and so the representation that they oftentimes receive is not going to be the one where I won't say this, where in certain cases where you could take a side-by-side situation, and if they had the money and the means, the outcome was different. That's what I was referring to. But there are a lot of systemic, to me, issues that has placed us where we are trying to seek justice in this situation, which is, for me, the bigger problem. I'm not an attorney, but I don't believe that for second-degree crime, you have to have intent. I think I heard that, but I don't think that's the case. You don't have to prove intent for second-degree murder.
Yes, ma'am, you do.
You do?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Then I'm incorrect about that. But I will say that, for many individuals who have lived in trauma and in fear, oftentimes they are put into a situation where they're just trying to survive. And then when something like this happens and they're trying to defend themselves, then they find themselves further in a much more complex situation. And then they have no level of trust. The system really has failed them to some degree. And we're just really trying to rectify this whole matter. Now, I'm going to say this, and I want to say this very lightly, because when I had my bill, it wasn't you, but I was working with some other individuals who were supposed to come back and work with me to come up with a bill, and that did not happen. We need an answer to this problem, because this is an issue. And I like to know, and I think, in all honesty, I think Senator Hodges, she hit the nail on the head when she talked about the billion-dollar industry in human trafficking. I mean, I know it's not just about that, but this is a great part of this bill. And when we were in retreat a couple of weeks ago, and we heard some of the references that were made by officers, number one, when they arrested them, that was concerning to me, because certain things would say to them when they were arrested, and what happened afterwards. That's a whole nother system. But that's because it's a billion-dollar industry. So there's a lot in this. There are a lot of factors that cannot be dismissed.
If I could just briefly.
Sure.
And it is actually a thank you, Senator, because occasionally advocates require chastisement. I heard it earlier today. I've been the subject of it at your hands before. And where we have fallen down on our commitments, I do think it's appropriate that that happens. I will thank you because you've done so, as always, in a very gracious fashion. Where we have fallen down on a commitment to you personally, Senator, that is inappropriate. Where I make a commitment, and I realize Senator Mizell may have stepped out, I can see behind me now, but where I make a commitment to continue to work with an author, my word is the only thing I have here. My word is my bond, and if I make it, I do hope to fix that bridge that sounds like it may have been burned in the past. But I will commit to doing so, whether that's you on a bill, whether that's Senator Mizell, whether that's I don't care what party you are, I don't care what branch of the legislature you're in. We can work together, and the lines of communication remaining open makes us stronger as a group. So I, again, thank you.
And that's one thing you and I both agree on, because party affiliation does, for me, is not a driving factor. Because at the end of the day, the people who elected me, they want to make sure I just get the job done. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Barrow. We're going to have to wait on Senator Mizell for a minute. She went across or downstairs to vote on an amendment on a bill. But, ineffective assistance of counsel is something that's kind of come up indirectly. And that's something that's very difficult to deal with, and that's the Bar Association's job, not ours. And we can't do anything about it because the Constitution doesn't allow us to. But if a lawyer does his job, he should be able to get that kind of information in front of, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I handled some criminal cases early in my career, in part because we didn't have an IDB. And we were told you're going to represent some people, and I did the best I could, and nobody ever went to jail on my watch. But I did represent someone who was accused of murder, and I did assert the case of self-defense, and I went around town and I gathered up all kinds of affidavits from witnesses. The witness next door, the prosecutors, I'm not going to repeat him verbatim, but the ADA said, because I gathered information about him being a bad guy, and ultimately I got it all in front of the judge in a pre-sentencing when I was able to plead out to negligent homicide, which was a deal that they wouldn't accept. They wouldn't go for any jail time. And of course the ADA said, early on said, I don't remember it being open season on Sorry Sons of Guns. But he didn't say Sorry Sons of Guns.
Sure.
But nonetheless, that evidence although I couldn't have used the abuse at trial to prove or not prove whether she was guilty of murder, I used it in the sentencing, and the DA ultimately acted appropriately and agreed to a reduced sentence and or a reduced plea to negligent homicide, resulting in no jail time whatsoever. And I gathered up everybody in town that would say she was a good guy, and I gathered up the evidence to show his prior convictions for manslaughter and other crimes, which would not have been admissible in court, but were admissible at the sentencing stage, and so she didn't serve any time in jail. And that's the same system roughly we have today, except I would not be allowed to handle that case now because I'm not capital certified and I'm not, but in any event, we'll I'm going to read in the rest of the cards in opposition. Obviously, we have Christine Russell here. Sonia Cardia Porter with the 19th JDC is wanted to speak, but she had to leave in opposition. Of course, we have Zach Daniels in opposition. Billy Joe Harrington, District Attorney in 10th JDC in opposition. Perry Nicosia in the St. Bernard District Attorney's Office in opposition, not wishing to speak. Sam DeQuilla in opposition, not wishing to speak. Chad Petrie, DA in St. Landry Parish, not wishing to speak. Bradley Burgett, Concordia Parish, not in opposition, not wishing to speak. Jay Lemoyne, Grant Parish, DA in opposition, not wishing to speak. And Tom Barrett with the Cameron, I guess he is the Cameron Parish DA, in opposition, not wishing to speak. So we're just going to have to just wait here for a minute until Senator Mizell comes back to close on her bill. So just stand by. We're not going to recess. We're just going to wait for a minute. Okay, we're done. What?
We're back soon enough, Mr. Chair? We're back
Yes. Thank you. You were back very timely this time, Senator Barrow. So no demerits.
No demerits.
No demerits. Okay. Thank you, everybody. It's been a long day. Senator Mizell, now it's time for you to close on your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll be merciful to all of you all have been great and attentive, and I appreciate it. I appreciate the testimony. I'm going to, I can read the room. I believe that we've had a conversation. There are places I don't think minds will ever meet, but there are places the minds can meet, and I think the areas that where I heard concern today, I would hope the people who can bring about some solutions will bring about substantive solutions, because there's absolutely things that can be done in a large part of the concerns we've had. I agree, this bill is not going to bring about trafficking arrest, but we should be having more trafficking arrest. More prosecution. So, there's things, that we could do. I just, on my closing, I just want to say what it does, it allows courts to consider the role abuse played in a survivor's offense. It permits resentencing for those with clear documented evidence. It requires expert testimony and corroborating records, medical, legal, social. It maintains judicial discretion. So there are things that I've heard said that the bill did not do or would do that is not true to the bill. And maybe people were looking at the original, I don't know. What it does not do, it does not apply to everyone. Only abuse survivors that have verified documentation. Does not reduce sentences automatically. There is a high burden of proof. Not everybody, I know you use the term bad, there's a bad person. There are bad people who may want to do this, but there's going to be a burden of proof that prevents bad people who don't deserve the reconsideration from doing it. Does not cover sex crimes or capital offenses. Those criminals with that cannot be reconsidered, and does not create a flood of litigation. I think that we've bantered that about today. So I just hope this is the beginning, maybe not of a continuing conversation right now, but from here at this point on.
Thank you. Will you take a question on closing?
Yeah.
Okay. Senator Barrow.
It's not a question. First of all, I want to thank you, Madam Chair, for your hard work on this bill, and maybe between here and the floor, you can continue to keep working on the bill. I hope I wasn't quite sure where you were going. I hope that you're not giving up. So I hope that you will continue to keep working on the bill. Maybe between here and the floor, we can come up with some additional compromises. So at the appropriate time, Mr. Chair, I would like to report the bill as amended.
Okay, we do have a motion. Are you concluded, Senator Mizell?
I am. Thank you.
Okay. We have a motion to report Senate Bill 152 with amendments. Is there an objection? I will object. Madam Secretary, please call the roll. A yes vote is a vote to send it to the floor. A no vote is to keep the bill in committee.
You ready? Senator Morris?
No.
No. Senator Barrow?
Yes.
Yes. Senator Cloud?
No.
No. Senator Hodges?
Yes.
Yes. Senator Kleinpeter?
No.
No. 3-2.
Okay. I'll make a motion to defer the bill. Any objection to that? There being none, Senate Bill 152 will be deferred. Thank you, Senator Mizell. Thank you to all the witnesses.
Thank you. Thank
It's
you
a very
all.
emotional thing. And I do agree, sex trafficking is something needs to be attacked. I don't know how to do it, but maybe working with the DAs, because they want to prosecute those kind of cases as badly as we do. All right. Senator Kleinpeter makes the motion to adjourn. There being no objections, we will adjourn.
I know.